The lifeboat pitched violently in the darkness, and Daniel Cross held on to the unconscious woman in his arms with everything he had, his boss, the woman who'd barely looked at him before yesterday. Now her survival was entirely in his hands, and the ocean wanted them both dead. He'd survived worse, losing his wife, raising his daughter alone, working 3 jobs to keep the lights on. But this? This was different, because if Avery Monroe didn't wake up soon, none of his experience mattered. Welcome to a story about 2 people who had to lose everything to find what they never knew they needed. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The fluorescent lights of Sterling and Wade's 42nd floor hummed with the particular frequency of corporate ambition. Daniel Cross moved through the operations department like a shadow, present, necessary, but rarely noticed. At 33, he'd mastered the art of being competent without being visible, a survival skill he'd honed over 5 years of single parenthood and entry-level positions that barely covered rent. Cross, do you have the consolidated reports for the Monroe presentation? Daniel looked up from his desk to find Marcus Chen, one of the senior analysts, hovering with the expression of someone who'd forgotten something crucial approximately 10 minutes before a major deadline. Already on the shared drive, Daniel said, pulling up the file location on his screen. I included the quarterly comparisons you mentioned yesterday and cross-referenced them with the Patterson account metrics. The formatting matches the template Miss Monroe's office uses. Marcus blinked. I didn't ask you to. I know. But the Patterson parallels strengthen the growth projection argument, and Ms. Monroe always wants data that tells a complete story, not just supporting evidence. Daniel kept his tone neutral, stating facts rather than seeking praise. If you don't need them, the deletion's easy enough. No, this is perfect. Marcus was already scanning the data, his relief palpable. You're a lifesaver, Cross. Seriously. Daniel returned to his work without comment. Marcus would take credit for the additional research. They both knew it, but that was fine. Daniel had learned long ago that visible success came with expectations he couldn't meet, not with a 6-year-old daughter waiting at after-school care and a carefully balanced schedule that left no room for the late nights and weekend emergencies that accompanied advancement. Across the floor, through walls of glass that separated executive territory from the general workspace, Avery Monroe stood before a presentation screen with the posture of someone who'd never questioned her right to command a room. At 28, she was the youngest executive in Sterling and Wade's 100-year history, a fact that her detractors mentioned frequently and her supporters cited as evidence of exceptional merit. Daniel had seen her exactly 3 times in person. Once in the lobby, moving through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who measured time in billable increments. Once in an elevator, where she'd stood in perfect silence, her attention on her phone while 20 other people barely breathed. And once in a department-wide meeting, where she'd dismantled a proposed strategy with questions so precise that the presenting team had looked like students failing an exam. She was brilliant. Everyone acknowledged that. She was also intimidating in a way that had nothing to do with her position and everything to do with the absolute clarity of her expectations. Attention Sterling and Wade personnel. The announcement crackled through the overhead speakers, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. All staff assigned to the Pacific Summit Initiative, please report to Conference Room A for immediate briefing. Repeat, all Pacific Summit personnel to Conference Room A. Daniel frowned. He wasn't assigned to Pacific Summit. That was the massive tech sector expansion Avery Monroe had been spearheading for 8 months. The kind of project that made careers and filled industry publications with speculation about Sterling and Wade's strategic direction. His phone buzzed. An email from Human Resources, marked urgent. Daniel Cross. You have been temporarily reassigned to Pacific Summit Initiative support staff, effective immediately. Report to Conference Room A, 42nd floor, 2 p.m. today. Contact HR with scheduling conflicts within 1 hour. Daniel read it twice, certain there'd been a mistake. He opened his calendar. Nothing about Pacific Summit, no prior communication, no explanation for why someone from operational support would be pulled into an executive-level project. He checked the time. 1:47 p.m. 13 minutes. Everything okay? Sarah from accounting leaned over the partition, her expression curious. You look like you just got audited. Reassignment notice, Daniel said, still staring at the email. Pacific Summit. Sarah's eyebrows rose. The Monroe Project? That's random. You request that? No. Huh. Sarah settled back into her chair. Well, Monroe doesn't do random. If you're in, there's a reason. Good luck, Cross. Don't let the Ice Queen freeze you out. Daniel didn't respond to the nickname, one of several that circulated about Avery Monroe, most of them trading on variations of cold, calculating, and emotionless. He'd heard them all, had never participated in the break room speculation about whether she was actually human or just exceptionally good at pretending. Conference room A was already half full when Daniel arrived at 1:58. He recognized most of the faces, senior analysts, project managers, a few people from legal and compliance. No one else from operations. No one else at his level. Avery Monroe entered at exactly 2 o'clock. She moved with the economy of motion that characterized everything about her. No wasted steps, no unnecessary gesture. Her dark suit was impeccable. Her hair pulled back in a style that suggested someone who considered appearance a component of professional effectiveness rather than personal expression. She carried no notes, no tablet, no visible preparation materials. "Thank you for your prompt attendance," she said, her voice carrying the particular clarity of someone accustomed to being heard. "We have a significant development regarding Pacific Summit that requires immediate response and flexible deployment of resources." She pulled up a presentation on the main screen, a luxury cruise ship, gleaming white against tropical waters. "The Meridian Crown," Avery continued, "flagship vessel of Oceanic Luxury Lines, currently contracted for a 5-day executive summit hosted by Takahashi Technologies. Takahashi is our primary target for the Pacific Expansion Partnership. 3 days ago, their CEO indicated willingness to accelerate negotiations under one condition. He wants preliminary discussions to occur during the summit voyage, which departs from San Diego in 48 hours. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel did the math quickly. 48 hours meant no time for the usual preparation, no time for the careful choreography that preceded major negotiations. "I will be attending," Avery said, "along with essential support personnel. This is not optional. The partnership value exceeds $200 million in year one projections. Takahashi wants informal access, which means we need to be prepared for formal negotiations disguised as casual conversation." Questions? A senior analyst raised his hand. "What's the team composition?" "Myself primary, Kaufman from legal for contract framework, Simmons from finance for capital structure discussions." Avery's gaze swept the room and landed with uncomfortable precision on Daniel. "And Cross from operations for logistical support and documentation." Every head turned. Daniel felt the weight of 30 confused stares. Kaufman was a partner. Simmons was a vice president. Daniel was not in their category, not even in their hemisphere of corporate hierarchy. "Cross," Avery said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes, Miss Monroe." Daniel stood, uncertain of protocol. "Your operational analyses for the Richardson and Patterson accounts demonstrated comprehensive understanding of supply chain integration and market positioning. Your documentation is thorough, your data cross-referencing is exceptional, and your work requires minimal revision. Those capabilities are essential for supporting complex negotiations where details matter. Are you available for immediate deployment?" It wasn't really a question, but Avery Monroe was looking at him directly, and Daniel realized with a strange jolt that she'd actually read his work. Not just glanced at reports that carried his contributions buried in team submissions, but read them closely enough to identify specific qualities. "I have a daughter," Daniel said, the words emerging before he could calculate their professional risk. 6 years old. I'd need to arrange care." Something flickered across Avery's expression, too quick to interpret, gone before Daniel could analyze it. 48 hours, she said. "Is that sufficient time to make arrangements?" "Yes." "Then you're confirmed. HR will provide travel documentation and itinerary details within 2 hours. Departure is Thursday morning, 0600. The summit concludes Tuesday evening. Questions?" Daniel had approximately 500 questions. He asked none of them. "No, Ms. Monroe." "Good. Kaufman, Simmons, Cross. Individual briefings in my office, sequential, starting in 30 minutes. Kaufman first. Dismissed. The room emptied with the controlled chaos of people trying to look calm while mentally reorganizing their entire week. Daniel remained seated, staring at his hands and trying to understand what had just happened. Cross. He looked up. Avery Monroe stood 3 feet away, holding a tablet. Your briefing is at 3:15, she said. I need you prepared for multidimensional support. This isn't filing and note-taking. Takahashi's team will test our operational understanding of Pacific market infrastructure. You'll need to speak competently about supply chain vulnerabilities, regulatory frameworks, and implementation timelines. Can you do that? Daniel met her gaze. Her eyes were gray. He'd never been close enough to notice before, and completely unreadable. I can do that. Good. Don't be late. She turned to leave, then paused. And Cross, your daughter. I understand the complexity of single-parent scheduling. If you need company resources to ensure appropriate care during the trip, speak with HR. Sterling and Wade supports essential personnel. She left before Daniel could respond. He sat in the empty conference room for 3 full minutes, processing the strangest professional interaction of his career. Avery Monroe knew he was a single parent. Avery Monroe had read his operational analyses closely enough to cite specific accounts. Avery Monroe had just pulled him into a $200 million negotiation with 48 hours' notice. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter's school. Reminder, parent-teacher conference scheduled for Friday, 3 p.m. Please confirm attendance. Daniel stared at the message, doing calculations he'd done 1,000 times before. Conflicting obligations, impossible choices, the constant equation of being both provider and present parent. He typed back, need to reschedule, work emergency, will call to arrange alternative time. Then he opened his contacts and called his ex-mother-in-law, the only person he trusted completely with his daughter. Margaret, it's Daniel. I need a favor. 47 hours later, Daniel stood on the dock in San Diego with a carry-on bag and the particular exhaustion that came from compressing a week's worth of preparation into 2 days. He'd spent 16 hours reading briefing materials, 8 hours reviewing Pacific market data, 4 hours arranging Emma's care, and approximately 3 hours sleeping. The Meridian Crown loomed before him like a floating city, 12 decks of luxury wrapped in maritime engineering, the kind of vessel where rooms were called suites and meals were called experiences. Cross. Daniel turned. Avery Monroe approached with the same efficient stride she used in the office, now somehow perfectly calibrated for a marina boardwalk. She wore casual business attire that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, a blazer that managed to look both relaxed and professional. Miss Monroe. Avery, she said. For the duration of this trip, we're operating as a team, not a hierarchy. Takahashi's people respond poorly to obvious power structures. We need to present as collaborative colleagues, not boss and subordinate. Can you manage that adjustment? Daniel blinked. You want me to call you Avery? I want you to function as an equal partner in these negotiations, which means dropping the deferential dynamic. Yes or no, Cross? Can you do that? Yes. Good. And I'll use Daniel, unless you prefer otherwise. Daniel's fine. Avery nodded once, a gesture of confirmation rather than approval. Kaufman and Simmons are already aboard. We board in 20 minutes. I need you to understand something before we do. She moved closer, lowering her voice slightly, not for privacy from any particular person, but with the instinct of someone who understood that important things were said quietly. This summit is informal by design, Avery said. Takahashi wants to evaluate us personally, not just professionally. That means dinners, social events, casual conversations that carry more weight than conference room presentations. It means I need a team that can adapt, respond, and read situations without explicit direction. Kaufman and Simmons have seniority, but they lack flexibility. You have something they don't. What's that? Avery's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something less severe than her usual controlled neutrality. You notice things, she said. Your reports don't just present data, they connect it. You see patterns across accounts that other people miss because they're too focused on individual metrics. That observational capacity is more valuable than experience in an environment where the real negotiation is happening between the official conversations. Do you understand? Daniel understood that Avery Monroe had just told him he was essential to a $200 million deal, and that the pressure of that statement was approximately equal to the pressure of raising a child alone. I understand. Then let's board. The Meridian Crown's interior was exactly as excessive as its exterior suggested. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff members who moved with the choreographed precision of people trained to be invisible. Daniel's cabin was larger than his apartment's living room, with a king bed, a sitting area, and a balcony overlooking the ocean. He unpacked methodically, hanging clothes and organizing materials with the same systematic approach he used for everything. Efficiency was survival. Organization was control. These were principles that had kept him functional through grief, poverty, and single parenthood. A knock interrupted his routine. Avery stood in the corridor, changed into evening attire, a dark dress that maintained professionalism while acknowledging the venue's expectations. Dinner in 30 minutes, she said. Takahashi's team plus 4 other companies competing for the same partnership opportunity. Kaufman and Simmons will focus on the other executives. I need you observing the support staff, assistants, analysts, anyone below director level. That's where the real information lives. People talk more freely when they think they're not important. You want me to gather intelligence? I want you to pay attention, Avery corrected. There's a difference between gathering intelligence and simply noticing what people reveal when they're comfortable. Be yourself, Daniel. That's more valuable than trying to be strategic. She turned to leave, then paused. And Daniel? Thank you for making this work with such short notice. I know it wasn't easy. Before he could respond, she was gone. Daniel finished dressing, a suit that was professional without being expensive, the kind of clothing that suggested competence without claiming status, and made his way to the main dining room. The space was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Pacific sunset, tables were set with precision that suggested someone had used measuring tools, and the gentle motion of the ship added a surreal quality to the entire scene. Avery caught his eye from across the room and gestured subtly to an empty seat beside her. Daniel navigated the social geography carefully, noting the territorial arrangements, executives clustered with their teams, competing companies maintaining careful distance, Takahashi's people centered and observing. Daniel Cross, Avery said as he sat. Operations Specialist. Daniel, this is Kenji Takahashi, CEO of Takahashi Technologies. But Takahashi was younger than Daniel expected. Mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair, and the kind of relaxed confidence that came from building something significant. He extended his hand. Mr. Cross, Avery speaks highly of your analytical work. Daniel shook his hand, surprised by both the directness and the fact that Avery had apparently discussed him specifically. Thank you, Mr. Takahashi. I'm looking forward to learning more about your Pacific infrastructure initiatives. Please, call me Kenji. We're on a boat. Formality is exhausting. Takahashi smiled. And I'm looking forward to substantive conversation. Too many of these summits involve people who speak well but understand little. Avery assures me Sterling and Wade sends people who understand. The dinner progressed through 7 courses, each more elaborate than the last. Daniel found himself seated between Avery and a young woman named Yuki, who worked as Takahashi's logistics coordinator. While Avery engaged in careful conversation with Kenji and his senior team, Daniel listened to Yuki describe the operational challenges of expanding into Southeast Asian markets. The regulatory frameworks shift every 6 months, Yuki explained, her English precise despite not being her first language. What works in Singapore fails in Vietnam. What succeeds in Thailand creates problems in Indonesia. Most Western companies assume consistency. They fail because they don't adapt. That's the core challenge of scaling across diverse regulatory environments, Daniel said. You need systems flexible enough to accommodate variation without losing operational efficiency. At Sterling and Wade, we've been developing modular frameworks specifically for that problem, baseline structures with customizable components that respond to local requirements. Yuki's eyes brightened. Modular frameworks? Tell me more. For the next 20 minutes, Daniel found himself in exactly the kind of conversation Avery had predicted. Substantive, detailed, The kind of exchange where real information lived. Yuki asked smart questions. Daniel provided thoughtful answers, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he was aware of Avery listening, her attention split between her own conversation and his. The evening concluded with drinks on the upper deck. The ship had left port during dinner, and now the California coastline was a distant glow against the darkness. Daniel stood at the railing, letting the ocean air cut through the warmth of wine and social performance. "You did well." He turned. Avery stood beside him, holding a glass of something amber. "Yuki's smart," Daniel said, "and honest about their operational concerns. That's useful information." "Everything you learned tonight is useful information," Avery said. "Takahashi's team respects competence and honesty. They don't trust Polish. That's why I needed you here, Daniel. You don't perform expertise, you simply have it." Daniel looked at her. Really looked, perhaps for the first time without the filter of professional hierarchy. In the deck lighting, with the ocean behind her and the corporate armor slightly relaxed, Avery Monroe looked less like the ice queen of office rumor and more like a woman carrying the weight of exceptional expectations. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Yes." "Why me?" "Specifically." "There are senior analysts with more experience, people who've worked Pacific markets for years. Why pull someone from operations with 48 hours notice?" Avery was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same seriousness she applied to everything. "Because everyone else I could have brought would have tried to impress Takahashi," she finally said. "You're just trying to understand the work. That difference matters more than you realize." She finished her drink and set the glass on a nearby table. "Get some rest, Daniel. Tomorrow we have 3 separate meetings, and Takahashi wants to discuss supply chain integration over breakfast. I'll need you sharp." "I'm always sharp." Something that might have been amusement crossed Avery's face. "Yes," she said, "I've noticed." She left him alone with the ocean and the strange, disorienting awareness that the next 5 days were going to be far more complicated than he'd anticipated. The storm warnings began on day 3. Daniel woke to an announcement over the ship's intercom, a captain's voice, professionally calm but carrying an edge of concern. "Good morning, passengers. We're currently tracking a weather system developing approximately 200 miles northeast of our position. Out of an abundance of caution, we'll be adjusting our course to avoid the primary system. This may result in minor delays to our scheduled arrival. We'll provide updates as conditions develop. Thank you for your understanding." Daniel checked his phone. 6:47 a.m. The briefing with Takahashi wasn't until 9, which meant he had time for the workout routine that kept him functional and the coffee that kept him conscious. The ship's gym was nearly empty, just Daniel and one other person, a woman running on a treadmill with the focused intensity of someone using exercise as meditation rather than recreation. It took Daniel 3 seconds to recognize her. Avery ran with perfect form, her pace steady, her attention on the ocean visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wore athletic clothes that were as precisely chosen as everything else in her wardrobe, functional, high quality, entirely practical. Daniel took a treadmill 2 stations away, maintaining respectful distance. They ran in parallel silence for 20 minutes, the only sound the rhythm of footfalls and breathing and the ambient hum of the ship's systems. "You run regularly," Avery said, not looking over, not breaking stride. "Every morning, habit from my 20s before—" Daniel caught himself. "Before life got complicated." "Before your daughter." Daniel's stride faltered slightly. Avery had mentioned knowing he was a single parent, but the casual reference still surprised him. "Yes." "How old?" "6. Emma. She's—" Daniel searched for words that could possibly convey the entirety of what his daughter meant. "She's everything." Avery finally looked over, her expression unreadable, but her attention complete. "That must be difficult, balancing career and parenting alone." "It's math," Daniel said. 24 hours, subtract sleep, work, commute, basics. What's left goes to Emma. The math works if you're careful." "And trips like this? What happens to the math?" "My ex-mother-in-law, Margaret. She's—" Daniel paused, aware he was revealing more than he usually did to colleagues, let alone his boss. "She's the reason the math works at all." Avery nodded slowly, processing the information with the same analytical focus she applied to market data. My parents were both executives, she said. They had 3 children and full-time careers. The math, as you call it, was managed by nannies and boarding schools. We had everything except their time. It wasn't self-pity, it was simple statement of fact, delivered with the same neutral precision Avery used for everything. But Daniel heard the underlying truth. That time was currency, that presence was value, that some equations balanced on paper while failing completely in practice. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. It taught me what matters. Avery increased her pace slightly, a physical punctuation to the conversation's shift. And what doesn't? They finished their runs in silence. As they cooled down, stretching in the gym's recovery area, the ship's motion changed, subtle but noticeable. The gentle rocking that had characterized the voyage shifted into something with more force behind it. The storm, Avery said, noticing Daniel's attention. It's closer than they anticipated. Should we be concerned? Ships like this are designed for weather. We'll be fine. 6 hours later, Avery's certainty proved optimistic. The breakfast meeting with Takahashi proceeded normally, though the ship's motion was increasingly pronounced. By lunch, the ocean had transformed from scenic backdrop to active presence. Waves that crashed against the lower decks, wind that made the upper promenade unsafe, clouds that turned day into premature twilight. The afternoon meetings were canceled. Passengers were advised to remain in their cabins. The captain's voice returned to the intercom, still professional, but now carrying unmistakable concern. We're currently navigating the outer bands of a tropical system that intensified more rapidly than forecasted. All passengers should remain indoors. Crew will be distributing anti-nausea medication for those who need it. This is a precautionary measure. The Meridian Crown is fully capable of handling these conditions. Daniel stood at his cabin window, watching the ocean transform into something primal and violent. He'd grown up in Colorado, landlocked and mountain-bound. The ocean's power was abstractly understood, but never personally experienced. Until now. His phone rang. Avery. Daniel, are you in your cabin? Yes. Stay there. The crew's implementing additional safety protocols. We'll resume meetings once conditions improve. Avery, how bad is this actually? A pause. When Avery spoke again, her voice carried something Daniel had never heard from her before. Uncertainty. I don't know. The line went dead. For the next 3 hours, Daniel experienced a masterclass in maritime chaos. The ship pitched and rolled, objects shifted despite being secured, and the structural groaning of a massive vessel fighting massive forces created a soundtrack of creaking metal and stressed engineering. Daniel tried to work, reviewing notes and preparing analyses, but concentration proved impossible when the floor kept tilting and the window showed nothing but violence. At 9:47 p.m., the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, dim, red-tinted illumination that turned the cabin into something from a nightmare. The intercom crackled. All passengers, this is Captain Morrison. We've experienced a power failure affecting primary systems. Backup generators are online. I need everyone to remain calm and stay in your cabins. Crew members will be conducting safety checks. Do not leave your rooms unless directed by crew. Repeat, remain in your cabins. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Avery. You okay? He typed back, fine. You? Fine. Stay put. At 11:23 p.m., someone pounded on his door. Daniel opened it to find a crew member, young and clearly trying to maintain composure while being absolutely terrified. Sir, we're evacuating this section. There's structural damage on the deck below, and the captain wants passengers moved to more secure areas. Grab essential items only. We need to move quickly. Where are we going? Central Assembly Area D deck. Please, sir, quickly. Daniel grabbed his bag, his phone, his wallet. The corridor outside was chaos. Passengers emerging from cabins, crew members directing traffic, the ship rolling with enough force that walking required holding the walls. He saw Avery 3 cabins down, already moving toward the stairwell with the same efficient purpose she brought to everything. Their eyes met across the chaos. The ship lurched violently. Daniel slammed into the wall, felt the entire vessel cant at an angle that physics shouldn't allow. Somewhere below, something massive broke, the sound of tearing metal audible even over the storm. Everyone to the lifeboats! The captain's voice, no longer calm, no longer professional, just urgent. This is not a drill. Proceed to lifeboat stations immediately. What happened next occurred in fragments, disconnected moments of controlled panic and survival instinct. The stairwell. Passengers crowding, pushing, some crying, crew members trying to maintain order while clearly fighting their own fear. The lifeboat deck. Wind and rain so intense that seeing was nearly impossible. Massive orange boats being lowered on cables, people climbing in, crew doing head counts. Avery beside him, her hand gripping his arm, both of them soaked and shaking. "Stay with me," she said, or maybe shouted. The wind made hearing impossible. They reached a lifeboat. Crew members were loading passengers, counting seats, working with the desperate efficiency of people who knew time was running out. "How many?" A crew member yelling over the storm. "Two more!" Someone responding. Daniel climbed in, turned to help Avery. The ship rolled. Avery lost her footing, sliding across the tilting deck toward the railing and the ocean beyond. Daniel didn't think. He lunged, caught her wrist, his other hand gripping the lifeboat's entry rail with everything he had. Their eyes met. Hers were wide with fear, real, complete, human fear. "I've got you," Daniel said. He pulled. Avery scrambled. They both tumbled into the lifeboat as the crew member slammed the hatch and triggered the release. The descent was violent, cables singing, the boat swinging wildly, the ocean rising to meet them with waves that looked like mountains. They hit water, the cables released, and suddenly they were alone in the darkness, in a storm that had turned the ocean into a living monster, with 23 other terrified people and absolutely no idea where the ship had gone. Daniel held Avery as the lifeboat pitched and rolled, both of them soaked and shaking and alive. "We're okay," he said, though he had no idea if that was true. "We're okay." Avery didn't respond. She just held on to him with the grip of someone who'd lost every ounce of control and found herself entirely dependent on a stranger. Except Daniel wasn't a stranger anymore, and everything that had been professional, hierarchical, and carefully maintained had just shattered like the ship somewhere behind them in the darkness. The storm raged through the night with a fury that made conversation impossible. Daniel held on to the safety rope with one hand and Avery with the other, both of them wedged into the cramped space of the lifeboat as waves crashed over the canopy and the wind screamed like something alive and angry. 23 other people shared their floating prison, passengers and crew members, all of them strangers 6 hours ago, now bound together by survival and terror. Some were crying. Others sat in shocked silence. A few were actively sick, the combination of fear and motion overwhelming their body's capacity to cope. Daniel counted heads reflexively, the same way he counted Emma's breathing when she was sick, the same way he counted money before paying bills, the same way he counted everything because numbers were control and control was survival. 25 people, 3 children, including 1 infant, supplies secured in compartments along the hull, emergency beacons supposedly transmitting their location. Supposedly. "Daniel." Avery's voice was barely audible over the storm, her mouth close to his ear. "I can't feel my hands." He looked down. Her fingers were white, bloodless, gripping the safety rope with the locked tension of muscles that had been clenched for hours. "You need to let go," he said. "Slowly. I've got you." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Trust me." It was a strange thing to say to someone who'd been his boss 72 hours ago, but hierarchy meant nothing in a lifeboat being thrown across the Pacific by a storm that didn't care about corporate titles or career trajectories. Avery released the rope one finger at a time, and Daniel guided her hands into her lap, massaging circulation back into cramped muscles. She winced but didn't pull away, and Daniel realized this was probably the most physical contact Avery Monroe had permitted from a colleague in her entire professional life. "Thank you," she said. "We're going to be okay," Daniel told her, and tried to believe it himself. The storm broke just before dawn. It didn't fade gradually. It simply stopped, as if someone had thrown a switch. The wind died. The waves subsided into heavy swells. And suddenly the lifeboat was floating on an ocean that looked almost peaceful under a sky turning pink with sunrise. Daniel had never been so grateful to see daylight. Around him, people stirred from whatever states of shock or exhaustion they'd retreated into. The infant who'd been crying earlier had finally fallen asleep in her mother's arms. The 3 crew members who'd made it into their boat were doing damage assessment, checking supplies, trying to get the radio working. "Everyone okay?" The senior crew member, his name tag read Martinez, was maybe 30, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent his entire adult life on boats. "Anyone injured?" A chorus of negatives. "Bruises, certainly. Trauma, absolutely. But no one actively bleeding or broken." "Good. Okay. Let me be straight with you. The main radio's dead. Took water damage during the worst of it. The emergency beacon's working, but we don't know if it's transmitting properly. We've got supplies for 72 hours, maybe longer if we're careful. Coast Guard knows the ship was in distress. They'll be looking for us." "How long?" someone asked. A middle-aged man in pajamas, because apparently that's what he'd been wearing when the evacuation began. Martinez hesitated. "Could be hours, could be days. Depends on weather, search patterns, whether other boats picked up our signal. But they will find us. That's not a question. It's just a matter of when." Avery shifted beside Daniel, and he felt her entire body tense with a particular kind of frustration he recognized. The frustration of someone accustomed to controlling outcomes confronting a situation where control was impossible. "What about the other lifeboats?" she asked. "How many launched?" "Don't know," Martinez said honestly. "We were on the port side, mid-ship. In conditions like that, coordination breaks down. Could be 6 boats. Could be 12. We won't know until rescue arrives." He started organizing people, assigning tasks, rationing food, collecting rainwater if clouds returned, maintaining watch schedules. The work was busy work, mostly, Daniel suspected, designed to give people purpose and prevent panic. Daniel volunteered for the first watch shift. Avery joined him without asking permission. They sat at the bow, scanning the horizon for anything: ships, aircraft, land, other lifeboats. The ocean stretched in every direction, endless and indifferent. "I've never felt this powerless," Avery said after a long silence. "Everything I've built, everything I've accomplished, none of it matters out here." Daniel understood what she wasn't saying, that competence had limits, that control was illusion, that expertise in corporate strategy didn't translate to survival at sea. "Powerlessness is relative," he said. "You're alive. We're alive. That's not nothing." "Is that how you cope? Relativism?" "It's how I survived the last 6 years. You recalibrate what success means. Some days success is paying rent. Some days it's getting Emma to eat vegetables. Some days it's just making it to bedtime without breaking down." Daniel watched a seabird circle overhead, impossibly far from any land he could see. "You redefine winning until winning becomes possible." Avery studied him with the same analytical intensity she'd used in conference rooms, but now directed at understanding rather than evaluating. "You don't talk much at the office," she said. "I noticed that. You're competent, thorough, but quiet. Why?" "Because talking gets you noticed. Being noticed creates expectations. Expectations require time I don't have." Daniel met her gaze. "I learned to be excellent at things that don't demand visibility. It's survival strategy." "That's why the senior analysts don't know how good you are," Avery said. "They think you're just efficient support staff. They have no idea you're running circles around their analysis quality. That's intentional. It's also a waste." Daniel smiled slightly. Says the woman who became an executive at 28. "Not everyone measures success by advancement." "What do you measure it by?" "Whether Emma's happy, whether she feels safe, whether she knows she's loved." The answer came easily because Daniel had been asking himself that question every day for 6 years. Everything else is secondary. Avery was quiet for a long moment, her expression shifting through something Daniel couldn't quite read. "My parents measured success by acquisition," she finally said. "Money, status, achievement. They acquired children the same way they acquired properties, as investments that should yield returns. I was supposed to be a lawyer. Constitutional law, preferably. Something prestigious. You chose business instead. I chose something I could control. Law is interpretation, argument, persuasion. Business is math. Numbers don't lie if you read them correctly. Avery wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-comfort that seemed foreign to her usual rigid posture. Or at least that's what I believed until I ended up in a lifeboat, where math is irrelevant and control is fantasy. Math's not irrelevant, Daniel said. Martinez is right. 72 hours of supplies, 25 people. That's math. We ration carefully, we survive longer. That's not fantasy. That's leverage. Something shifted in Avery's expression, not quite gratitude, but recognition. That someone understood how her mind worked. That logic wasn't abandonment of emotion, but a framework for managing it. You're good at this, she said. At what? Making unbearable situations bearable. Before Daniel could respond, Martinez called from the stern, "We've got a problem." Everyone turned. Martinez was holding up one of the water containers, his expression grim. "This canister's compromised. Seal broke during the storm. We've lost maybe 15% of our fresh water supply." A ripple of fear moved through the boat. Water was life. Everyone knew that instinctively, even people who'd never been stranded at sea. "How long does that give us?" The man in pajamas again, his voice tight. Martinez did the calculation visibly, his lips moving. 48 hours at standard ration. Maybe 60 if we cut consumption. "What about rain?" someone else asked. "We can collect rain if it comes, but we can't count on it." Martinez set the container down carefully. "I'm not trying to scare anyone. We have enough. But we need to be smart. Minimal physical exertion. Stay out of direct sun. Make every drop count." The mood in the lifeboat shifted. People who'd been cautiously optimistic now looked genuinely frightened. The mother with the infant started crying quietly. Daniel stood up. He wasn't sure what he was going to say until the words came out. "We're going to be fine," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We have water. We have food. We have shelter. Coast Guard knows we're out here. This is uncomfortable and scary, but it's manageable. We just need to stay calm and work together." "And who put you in charge?" A woman Daniel didn't recognize, her tone sharp with fear disguised as aggression. "No one," Daniel said evenly. "I'm just telling you what I tell myself when things get hard. You break problems into pieces. You solve one piece at a time. Right now the piece is water conservation, so we do that. Tomorrow's piece might be different, but we don't solve tomorrow's problems today." Martinez nodded slowly. "That's good advice. Let's focus on what we can control." First watch continues. We need eyes scanning for rescue. Everyone else, stay hydrated, but don't drink more than necessary. We'll reassess in 12 hours. The tension eased slightly. People returned to their positions, the crisis not solved, but at least managed. Avery looked at Daniel with something new in her expression. Respect, maybe, or curiosity about who this person actually was beneath the quiet competence she'd noticed in operational reports. "That was good," she said quietly. "That was necessary," Daniel corrected. "Panic kills faster than dehydration." The day stretched out in strange rhythms, long periods of nothing interrupted by moments of activity. Someone spotted a ship on the horizon, too far away to signal. A plane passed overhead, but their flares didn't attract attention. The sun climbed, turned the lifeboat into an oven, then descended toward another night at sea. Avery stayed close to Daniel throughout, not clinging, exactly, but maintaining proximity that suggested he'd become an anchor point in a situation where everything else was uncertain. As evening approached, Martinez distributed dinner rations, protein bars, and small portions of water. People ate quietly, the novelty of survival wearing into exhausted routine. "Can I ask you something personal?" Avery said as they shared the minimal meal. "Yes." "Emma's mother. What happened?" Daniel had spent 6 years developing responses to that question. Polite deflections, minimal information, ways to acknowledge without engaging, but sitting in a lifeboat with a woman who'd revealed her own vulnerabilities, deflection felt dishonest. "Cancer," he said. "Diagnosed when Emma was 6 months old. She fought for 2 years. Died 3 weeks after Emma's second birthday." Avery's expression softened in a way Daniel had never seen from her. Not pity, but genuine compassion. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Daniel took a small sip of water, making it last. She was everything good about the world. Kind, optimistic, believed people were fundamentally decent, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. She made me believe in possibility, and then she was gone, and I had this tiny human who needed me to be everything, and I had no idea how to do that. But you figured it out. I'm still figuring it out, every day. Some days I succeed, some days I barely hold it together. Daniel looked at the darkening sky, thinking about Emma with Margaret, hoping she wasn't too worried. But she's happy. That's the measurement that matters. Avery was quiet for a long moment, processing what he'd shared with the same careful attention she applied to complex data. I've never wanted children, she said. It seemed incompatible with the life I chose. Career, autonomy, control. Children require surrender of all those things. They do, Daniel agreed. But they give you something in return. Purpose that isn't about acquisition or achievement. It's just, he searched for words. Love without conditions. Presence without agenda. It's terrifying and beautiful. You're different than I expected, Avery said. How so? At the office, you're invisible by design, competent but unremarkable. But you're actually... She paused, clearly uncomfortable with whatever she was about to articulate. You're one of the most capable people I've ever met, not just professionally, humanly. You manage complexity without losing yourself in it. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments from Avery Monroe weren't exactly common occurrences. Thank you, he finally said. I'm not being kind, I'm being accurate. Avery shifted position, their shoulders touching in the cramped space. And I'm realizing I misjudged you. I thought you were talented but limited by circumstance. Now I think you're talented and wiser than most people will ever be because of circumstance. Night fell completely. Stars emerged with shocking clarity, unpolluted by any human light source, stretching across the sky in patterns Daniel had never seen from the city. It's beautiful, Avery said quietly. It is. I've never just looked at stars before. I've always been too busy, too focused on next steps and strategic planning. She tilted her head back, taking in the vast display. This is the first time in maybe 10 years that I have literally nothing I should be doing instead of exactly what I'm doing right now. How does it feel? Terrifying, Avery admitted, and oddly peaceful. They sat together under the stars, not talking, just existing in a moment that was both beautiful and surreal. Around them, other people settled into sleep or quiet conversation. The infant fussed briefly, then quieted. The ocean rocked them with the rhythm of something ancient and indifferent. Daniel? Avery's voice was soft, uncertain in a way he'd never heard from her. Yeah? Thank you for pulling me back. On the ship, I would have gone over if you hadn't caught me. I know. I've spent my whole life not needing anyone. Being self-sufficient was survival. Dependence was weakness. She turned to look at him directly, her face barely visible in the starlight. But if I was going to need someone, I'm glad it was you. Daniel felt something shift between them. Not quite attraction, not yet, but recognition. That vulnerability was trust. That need wasn't weakness when it was mutual. We're going to get through this, he said. Promise? Promise. It was a promise he had no business making, no ability to guarantee. But sometimes promises weren't about certainty. They were about intention, about choosing hope over resignation. Avery leaned against his shoulder and Daniel let her, both of them finding comfort in simple human contact. The second night passed more quietly than the first. No storm, just gentle waves and the creaking of the lifeboat and the sound of 25 people breathing in various rhythms of sleep and wakefulness. Daniel dozed in fragments, his internal alarm system never fully disengaging. Years of single parenthood had trained him to sleep lightly, always ready for Emma's nightmares or illness or just need for reassurance. That same vigilance kept him semi-aware of the lifeboat's motion, of Avery's breathing beside him, of Martinez doing rounds to check on everyone. Dawn came gradually, the sky lightening from black to deep blue to pink to gold. Daniel watched the sunrise with the particular appreciation of someone who'd survived to see it. Beside him, Avery stirred, blinking awake with the disorientation of someone who'd forgotten where she was. Morning, Daniel said quietly. Morning. She sat up slowly, wincing at stiffness. How long did I sleep? 5 hours, maybe 6. You? Enough. Avery studied him with the analytical attention that was her default mode. You barely slept at all, did you? I'm used to it. Emma's not a great sleeper. I've functioned on fragments for years. Martinez appeared with the morning rations. Another protein bar, another small portion of water. The supplies were holding, but everyone could feel the math tightening. 48 hours had become 36. 36 was rapidly approaching 24. Any signs of rescue? The pajama man asked, his optimism from yesterday fading into anxious realism. Not yet, Martinez said, but it's early. Aircraft do search patterns, usually starting at dawn. We keep watching, keep hoping. And if they don't find us today? Martinez didn't sugarcoat it. Then we ration tighter and hope for tomorrow. The day crawled forward. People started showing signs of real stress, dehydration, headaches, irritability, the psychological weight of uncertainty. The mother with the infant was struggling, trying to keep the baby calm while managing her own fear. One of the older passengers was developing a cough that concerned Daniel. He found himself naturally moving into a caretaker role, checking on people, offering quiet reassurance, helping Martinez distribute rations and organize tasks. It was the same skill set he used with Emma, just scaled up. People needed to feel seen, heard, cared for, especially when they were scared. You're good with people, Avery observed during the afternoon watch. I never saw that at the office. At the office, I avoid people intentionally. Here, avoidance isn't an option. No, it's more than that. You read emotional states the way I read financial projections. You know what people need before they articulate it. Daniel shrugged. Parenthood crash course. You learn to interpret needs from insufficient data. Emma couldn't tell me what was wrong when she was 2. I had to figure it out from crying patterns and behavior changes. Same principle applies to adults, just with more vocabulary. I wouldn't know where to start, Avery said. Yes, you would. You read situations constantly. You just apply it to business instead of emotions. It's the same skill, different application. Avery considered this, her expression thoughtful. Maybe. Around mid-afternoon, the weather shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Clouds building on the horizon, wind picking up, the air pressure changing in ways that made Daniel's ears pop. Martinez noticed too. We might get rain, he said. That would solve our water problem. What about another storm? Someone asked nervously. Clouds don't mean storm. Could just be weather. We'll monitor it. But Daniel saw the concern in Martinez's eyes. Another storm would be catastrophic. They'd survived one through luck as much as engineering. A second might exceed both. The clouds continued building through the afternoon, massive towers of white and gray climbing into the sky. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of rain. Everyone, prepare collection containers, Martinez ordered. If this hits, we're going to gather every drop we can. People mobilized with renewed purpose. The prospect of water, of solving their most pressing problem, energized everyone despite growing exhaustion. The rain started just before sunset, not violently, just steady, purposeful precipitation that drummed on the lifeboat's canopy and ran off in streams they captured with containers, tarps, anything that could channel water into storage. Daniel and Avery worked together, positioning a tarp to maximize collection, both of them soaked within minutes and neither caring. Water was life. Discomfort was irrelevant. This is good, right? Avery asked, having to raise her voice over the rain. This solves the problem? If we can collect enough before it stops. And if it doesn't escalate into something worse. As if summoned by his words, lightning cracked across the sky, brilliant and terrifying. Thunder followed, a deep rumble that Daniel felt in his chest. Everyone inside the canopy, Martinez shouted. Secure all loose items, now! They scrambled to comply, abandoning the water collection in favor of safety. Daniel pulled Avery under the canopy just as the wind picked up, transforming steady rain into horizontal sheets of water. Not again, someone whimpered. Please, not again. But the storm, if it could be called that, passed as quickly as it arrived. 15 minutes of intensity, then gradual decrease, then just rain again, steady and manageable. They'd collected nearly 10 gallons. Martinez checked the containers with visible relief. This gives us another 72 hours, maybe more. The collective exhale was almost audible. Not rescued, not safe, but not dying of thirst either. Small victories in a situation where small was all you could hope for. That night, with water supplies replenished and rain still falling gently, the mood in the lifeboat shifted. People talked more, shared stories, began treating their temporary community as something real rather than just a crisis survival unit. Daniel learned that the pajama man was an accountant from Portland. The woman who'd challenged him earlier was a nurse from Sacramento. The older man with the cough was a retired teacher who'd been celebrating his 40th anniversary on the cruise. Stories emerged in fragments, lives, histories, the accumulated weight of human experience compressed into a 20-foot boat floating on an indifferent ocean. "What about you?" the nurse asked Avery directly. "You're the executive, right? From the summit?" Avery stiffened slightly, and Daniel felt her discomfort. In the lifeboat, her title was liability rather than asset. Achievement meant nothing when everyone was equally powerless. "I work in corporate strategy," she said carefully. "Mergers, partnerships, market expansion." "Sounds important," the accountant said. "It seemed important 4 days ago." Avery's voice carried something Daniel hadn't heard before: doubt. "Now, I'm not sure what importance means." "It means different things in different contexts," the retired teacher said. His voice was rough from the cough, but kind. "Your work probably affects thousands of people, creates jobs, builds systems. That's one kind of importance. But right now, the important thing is we're alive and together. Both can be true." Avery nodded slowly, processing the wisdom of someone who'd spent 40 years teaching teenagers the difference between significance and value. Later, after most people had settled into sleep, Daniel and Avery sat together at the bow again, their regular spot now, watching the rain continue under a sky they couldn't see. "I don't know how to do this," Avery said quietly. "Do what?" "Be powerless. Be uncertain. Be—" She struggled with the word. "Vulnerable." "You're doing it right now," Daniel said. "That's how you learn, by doing it badly until you do it better." "I don't do things badly." "Everyone does things badly sometimes. You've just structured your life to avoid situations where that's possible." Avery was quiet for a long moment. "My father told me that vulnerability was weakness, that showing need was invitation for exploitation, that the world respects strength and devours everything else." "Your father was wrong," Daniel said simply. "How do you know?" "Because Emma needs me completely, and that hasn't made her weak. It's made her strong enough to ask for help when she needs it, which is something most adults never learn." Daniel shifted to look at Avery directly. "Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's honesty. And honesty is the only thing that makes connection possible." "Is that what this is?" Avery asked. "Connection?" "I think so." "What would you call it?" "I don't know, I've never—" She stopped, reformulating. "My relationships have always been transactional. Professional networks, strategic alliances, interactions with clear value exchange. This is different. This is two people keeping each other sane while floating in the Pacific. It doesn't need a label." "No," Avery said. "I suppose it doesn't." She moved closer, not dramatically, just incrementally, until their shoulders touched again. Daniel felt the contact like electricity, awareness of her presence amplified by proximity and circumstance and the strange intimacy of shared survival. "Daniel?" "Yeah?" "When we get rescued, if we get rescued—" Avery stopped, seemingly uncertain how to finish the thought. "What? Will this still matter, what we're talking about, what we're—" She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "Will it translate to normal life, or is it just trauma bonding?" Daniel had been wondering the same thing, whether the connection forming between them was real or just circumstantial, whether it would survive the return to corporate hierarchies and separate lives. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think it's real enough right now, and that's worth something regardless of what happens later." Avery nodded slowly. "That's very wise." "That's very tired," Daniel corrected. "Wisdom looks different at 3 a.m. in a lifeboat." She laughed. Actually laughed, the sound surprising both of them. It was the first time Daniel had heard her laugh, and it transformed her entire face, replacing severity with something younger and unguarded. I like you, Daniel Cross, she said. I didn't expect to, but I do. I like you too, Avery Monroe. Even though I'm a demanding boss who pulled you onto a cruise ship that sank? Especially because of that, Daniel said. Otherwise, I'd still be at my desk, being invisible, incompetent, and slowly forgetting that I'm more than just a function. They sat together as the rain continued, not talking anymore, just existing in proximity that had become comfort. And somewhere in the darkness and uncertainty, something shifted between them. Friendship, maybe? Or the beginning of something that didn't have a name yet, but felt significant enough to matter. The third day dawned clear and hot. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving them with replenished water but also humid air that turned the lifeboat into a greenhouse. People stripped down to minimal clothing, seeking relief from heat that made breathing difficult. "Aircraft at 2 o'clock!" Martinez shouted suddenly, pointing at the sky. Everyone scrambled to look. Sure enough, a small plane was visible on the horizon, following what looked like a search pattern. Martinez grabbed the flare gun, aimed carefully, and fired. The flare arced into the sky, brilliant orange against blue, impossible to miss. The plane continued its course without changing direction. "Did they see it?" the nurse asked desperately. "I don't know." Martinez was already loading another flare. "Maybe. Search aircraft cover huge areas. Even if they spotted us, response takes time." He fired a second flare. The plane grew smaller, continuing its original trajectory, then disappeared beyond the horizon. The disappointment was crushing. People who'd been energized by the possibility of rescue deflated back into resignation. "They didn't see us," the accountant said flatly. "We don't know that," Martinez countered. "They might have logged our position. Rescue could be hours away." But hours became a full day, and no rescue came. That night, the mood was darker than before. Hope deferred was worse than no hope at all. People retreated into themselves, conserving energy and emotion. Daniel found Avery sitting alone at the stern, staring at nothing. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey, you okay?" "Define okay." Avery's voice was flat, exhausted. "I thought I could handle this. Uncertainty, powerlessness, all of it. But I'm starting to break, Daniel. I can feel it." He sat beside her, their bodies touching from shoulder to hip in the cramped space. "Breaking isn't failure," he said. "It's just reaching your limit. Everyone has one." "What's yours?" "I'll tell you when I find it." Avery leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture so uncharacteristic that it conveyed exactly how close to her limit she actually was. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. What if they don't find us?" "They will." "How do you know?" "I don't," Daniel admitted. "But belief doesn't require certainty. It just requires choice. I choose to believe we'll be rescued because the alternative is giving up, and I can't do that. I have a daughter who needs me. I have to get back to her. And if you don't? Then Margaret will raise her, and Emma will be loved and safe, and I'll have done everything I could to survive. That's all anyone can do." Avery was quiet for a long time, processing his words with the careful attention she gave everything important. "I want to survive," she finally said, "not for career or achievement or any of the things that mattered before. I want to survive because I want to know what comes next. With you. With this. Whatever this is." Daniel felt his heart rate increase, awareness shifting into something more complex than friendship or survival partnership. "Avery, I know it's complicated," she interrupted. "I know we have professional boundaries and personal circumstances and 1,000 reasons why this is impractical. But I also know that I've never felt this honest with anyone, and I don't want to lose that when we get back to normal life." Daniel turned to face her properly, their faces inches apart in the darkness. "I don't want to lose it either." "So what do we do?" "We survive," Daniel said. "We get rescued, and then we figure out what honesty looks like when we're not stranded at sea." "That simple?" "That complicated," he corrected, "but worth it." Avery smiled, a real smile, tired and uncertain, but genuine. "Okay," she said. "Let's do that." They sat together under the stars, holding on to each other and the fragile hope that tomorrow might bring rescue, resolution, or at least another day to survive together. And in the vast indifference of the Pacific Ocean, Two people found something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. Connection that transcended circumstance and reminded them that survival wasn't just about staying alive, but about finding reasons to want to. The fourth day broke with a sunrise that painted the ocean in shades of gold and amber, beautiful and indifferent to the 25 people who'd spent another night hoping for rescue that hadn't come. Daniel woke with Avery still leaning against him, both of them having fallen asleep in the awkward intimacy of the lifeboat's cramped quarters. She stirred as light touched her face, blinking awake with the momentary confusion that preceded full consciousness. "Morning," Daniel said quietly, not wanting to disturb the others still sleeping. "Morning." Avery sat up slowly, wincing at muscles stiff from days of immobility broken only by brief movements. "Any signs overnight?" Martinez saw lights on the horizon around 2 a.m. Could have been a ship, could have been reflection. By the time he got the flares ready, they were gone. Avery's expression tightened with the particular frustration of hope repeatedly deferred. "So we're still alone." "We're still afloat," Daniel corrected. That's not nothing." Around them, people were waking to the same reality they'd faced for 3 days. Heat, thirst despite rationed water, the psychological weight of uncertainty stretching toward its breaking point. The retired teacher's cough had worsened. The infant was listless from dehydration despite her mother's attempts to keep her hydrated. Even Martinez, who'd maintained optimistic authority throughout, looked worn down by the relentless sameness of survival. "We need to talk about options," Martinez said during the morning ration distribution. His voice was quiet enough that only Daniel and Avery could hear clearly. "We've got maybe 48 more hours of water at current consumption. Food's lasting longer, but people are starting to show real stress symptoms. I'm worried about the baby. And Thompson," he gestured toward the retired teacher, "that cough is getting worse. Could be pneumonia developing." "What are our options?" Avery asked, and Daniel heard the shift in her tone, back to executive mode, problem-solving rather than feeling. "We keep doing what we're doing and hope rescue comes before supplies run critical. Or," Martinez hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to suggest. "Or we start making harder choices about rationing. Prioritize the most vulnerable, cut everyone else's portions." "That's triage," Daniel said flatly. "That's survival," Martinez countered. "I don't like it either, but if we're not rescued soon—" "Land!" The shout came from the pajama-wearing accountant who'd volunteered for morning watch. He was pointing frantically toward the horizon, his voice cracking with excitement or desperation, or both. "There's land! I can see it!" Everyone scrambled to look. Daniel's heart rate spiked as he scanned the horizon, searching for whatever the accountant had seen. And there, barely visible, a dark smudge against the lighter blue of sky meeting ocean. Something that might be land, or might be cloud, or might be wishful thinking, made visible. "Are you sure?" the nurse asked, squinting. "I don't see anything." "There," the accountant insisted. "Low on the horizon, maybe 10 degrees to port. It's definitely land." Martinez pulled out binoculars from the emergency kit, focusing where the accountant indicated. His expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. "He's right," Martinez said slowly. "There's something there. Could be an island, hard to tell distance, maybe 15 miles, maybe 20. "Can we reach it?" Avery asked immediately, her mind already calculating options. "Depends on currents. This boat has minimal maneuverability. We can adjust direction slightly with the emergency oars, but we're mostly at the mercy of wind and water. If the current's favorable, we drift toward it. If not," Martinez lowered the binoculars, "we might pass right by." "Then we make it favorable," Avery said with the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to imposing will on circumstances. "We row." "Avery, these boats aren't designed for long-distance rowing. We've got emergency oars, but they're meant for minor adjustments, not propulsion." "Then we make minor adjustments continuously until they add up to major movement." Avery turned to address everyone. "We have a chance. Land is visible. We can either hope the ocean takes us there, or we can actively work toward reaching it. I vote for active effort." Daniel saw the strategy immediately. People needed purpose, needed to feel agency in a situation where they'd had none. Whether rowing would actually make a significant difference was almost irrelevant. The psychological benefit of trying mattered more than the physical result. "I'm in," he said, supporting Avery's instinct. Let's organize shifts, 20 minutes rowing, 20 minutes rest. Rotate through everyone capable. We conserve energy but maintain constant effort. The transformation was immediate. People who'd been passively enduring suddenly had something to do, a goal that made suffering purposeful rather than pointless. Even the retired teacher, despite his cough, insisted on taking a shift. They rowed. It was brutal work. The emergency oars were short and awkward, designed for steering rather than power. The lifeboat resisted movement, its design prioritizing stability over speed. The sun climbed higher, turning the boat into an oven where every exertion cost precious water through sweat. But they rowed. Daniel took the first shift with Martinez and two others, pulling water with strokes that probably moved them forward a few feet per minute at best. His shoulders burned, his hands blistered. Beside him, Martinez grunted with effort, and Daniel matched his rhythm, finding a cadence that was sustainable if not efficient. Avery took the second shift, and Daniel watched her row with the same absolute focus she applied to everything. Perfect form despite never having done this before, adjusting her technique based on observation, refusing to show weakness even when exhaustion was obvious. You don't have to prove anything, Daniel told her during her rest period, when she sat beside him breathing hard and dripping sweat. I'm not proving anything. I'm contributing. She took a small sip of water, rationed carefully. And I'm not letting anyone think I expect special treatment because I used to be in charge. Used to be? Avery smiled slightly, her face flushed from exertion. Out here, nobody's in charge. We're just people trying to survive. That's oddly liberating. By afternoon, the island had grown from a smudge to a definite shape, green and brown, rising from the ocean with what looked like dense vegetation. Distance was still impossible to judge, but it was clearly closer than before. Whether that was because of their rowing or favorable currents, no one knew. It didn't matter. Progress was progress. We're going to make it, the nurse said, her voice carrying the first genuine optimism Daniel had heard from her. We're actually going to make it. Don't celebrate yet, Martinez cautioned, though his own expression showed hope. We need to reach it before dark. Approaching an unknown island in darkness is dangerous. Could be reefs, rocks, all kinds of hazards. They rowed harder. Daniel's shift came again as the sun approached the horizon. His hands were raw, his shoulders screaming, his body running on fumes and determination. Beside him, Avery took her third shift despite obvious exhaustion. You should rest, Daniel said between strokes. So should you. I asked first. That's not how this works. Avery's voice was strained but firm. We do this together or not at all. The island grew larger as they approached. Definitely an island now, maybe a mile across, with a beach visible along one side and what looked like rocky outcroppings on the other. Palm trees swayed in the breeze. Somewhere behind the beach, hills rose into what might be jungle or dense forest. It's beautiful, someone whispered. It was. It was also potentially their salvation or their new prison, depending on whether rescue could find them on land any better than they'd found them at sea. Martinez steered them toward the beach, using the oars to navigate around visible rocks and what looked like coral formations. The sun was touching the horizon now, golden light turning the island into something from a postcard. Tropical paradise with the darker reality of their situation temporarily obscured by beauty. The lifeboat's hull scraped sand with a sound that felt like arrival and relief. They'd made it. Against odds and exhaustion and 4 days of uncertainty, they'd reached land. People practically fell out of the boat, stumbling onto the beach with the unsteady legs of those who'd been at sea too long. Some collapsed immediately. Others waded into the shallow water, laughing or crying or both. Daniel helped Avery out of the boat, both of them moving with the careful deliberation of people at the absolute edge of their physical capacity. They made it 3 steps up the beach before Avery's legs gave out. Daniel caught her, lowering them both to the sand, and they sat together watching the sun set over the ocean that had nearly killed them, but instead had delivered them here. We made it, Avery said, her voice barely audible. We made it, Daniel confirmed. Around them, Martinez was already organizing, securing the lifeboat, taking inventory of supplies, establishing basic camp parameters. But for this moment, Daniel let himself simply exist in the relief of solid ground and survival against odds he hadn't wanted to calculate. Daniel? Avery's voice was quiet, uncertain. Yeah? Thank you for keeping me alive. We kept each other alive. No. She turned to look at him directly, her gray eyes reflecting the sunset. You did more than survive. You gave everyone purpose when we had none. You made impossible things bearable. She stopped, seeming to struggle with articulation. You're the reason I didn't give up. Before Daniel could respond, she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or passionate, just a brief press of lips, salt-tasted and exhausted and completely honest. When she pulled back, her expression was vulnerable in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. I'm sorry, Avery said quickly. That was inappropriate. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize, Daniel interrupted. He reached up, touching her face gently. Don't apologize for being honest. Is this honest? Or is it just relief and proximity and trauma making us think we feel things we don't actually feel? I don't know, Daniel admitted, but I know I want to find out. When we're rescued, when we're back in the real world, I want to see if this, he gestured between them, survives normal life. Avery smiled, tired and uncertain but genuine. Me too. They sat together on the beach as darkness fell and the others established camp, both of them too exhausted to move but too aware of each other to rest. Something had shifted between them, something that went beyond survival partnership into territory neither had mapped but both wanted to explore. We should help with camp, Avery said eventually, though she made no move to stand. We should, Daniel agreed, equally motionless. Martinez appeared above them, grinning despite obvious exhaustion. You two planning to sit there all night, or you want to see what we found? They followed him into the tree line where the others had discovered a small freshwater stream running down from the island's interior. Clear, cold water that tasted like salvation after days of rationed supplies. This changes everything, Martinez said. We've got fresh water, shelter materials, probably food sources. We can survive here indefinitely if we need to. Do we need to? The accountant asked. Won't rescue find us faster on an island than on the ocean? Maybe. Maybe not. Island could be uncharted, could be off normal shipping routes, but at least we're not dying of thirst. Martinez started organizing tasks. We need shelter before full dark. Basic structure, just enough to keep rain off if weather turns. Tomorrow we do proper exploration, figure out what resources we have, establish long-term camp. People moved with renewed energy despite exhaustion. Having purpose, having tasks, made everything more bearable. Daniel found himself working alongside Avery, gathering palm fronds for shelter construction, neither of them talking much but moving in synchronized efficiency that came from days of forced proximity. By the time full darkness fell, they'd constructed something that barely qualified as shelter, palm fronds stretched over a frame of branches, enough to provide minimal protection for the most vulnerable members of their group. The rest would sleep on the beach, under stars that were somehow brighter here than they'd been on the ocean. Daniel lay on the sand, staring up at constellations he couldn't name, his body simultaneously exhausted and too aware of everything to sleep. Beside him, Avery shifted position, her hand finding his in the darkness. I'm scared, she whispered. Of what? That this is temporary. That when we get back, everything we've discovered here will disappear. That I'll become the Ice Queen again and you'll become invisible and we'll pretend none of this mattered. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. Then we don't let that happen. We choose different. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. It's just not easy. There's a difference. Avery was quiet for a long moment, processing his words with the careful thought she gave everything important. Tell me about Emma, she said finally. Really tell me. What's she like? Daniel felt something in his chest expand at the question, that Avery wanted to know, wanted to understand the most important part of his life rather than treating it as irrelevant detail. He searched for words adequate to convey his daughter's entirety. She's 6 years old and absolutely fearless. She asks why about everything, and she doesn't accept simplified answers. She wants complete understanding, even when the concepts are beyond her age. She's kind to everyone, even people who don't deserve it. She has Rachel's optimism and my analytical mind, which means she believes in possibility while understanding probability. She sounds extraordinary. She is. She's the best thing I've ever been part of creating, and she's the reason I have to survive this, Avery. Not for career, not for myself, for her. You're a good father, Avery said quietly. I can tell from how you talk about her. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She makes me better than I would be otherwise. They lay together under the stars, hands linked, both of them acutely aware that they'd crossed some invisible boundary between professional relationship and personal connection. What existed between them now was undefined but undeniable. Trust earned through survival, attraction complicated by circumstance, potential that terrified them both because it required vulnerability neither had practiced. Daniel? Avery's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Yeah? When we get back, if we get back, will you introduce me to Emma? I want to meet the person who made you who you are. Daniel's throat tightened with emotion he couldn't quite name. The idea of Avery meeting Emma, of his two worlds intersecting, felt both terrifying and right. I'd like that, he said. Good. Avery shifted closer, her head finding his shoulder in the position that had become familiar over days at sea. Then that's what we're surviving for, not just rescue, but what comes after. They fell asleep like that, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and discovered something worth fighting to preserve. Morning came with the sound of waves and birds, and Martinez organizing work details. Daniel woke to find Avery already up, standing at the water's edge and staring at the ocean with an expression he couldn't quite read. He joined her, and she acknowledged his presence without looking over. I've been thinking about the rescue signal, she said. We have one emergency beacon left. The question is when to use it. Why is that a question? Because if we use it now, we're broadcasting our location before we know if this island can sustain us. If rescue doesn't come immediately, we've wasted our one shot. But if we wait, explore, establish a stable camp first, we make rescue less urgent. We take control of the situation instead of desperately hoping someone finds us. Daniel understood the logic, but also recognized the danger of that thinking. You're talking about delaying our best chance of rescue because you want to feel in control. Avery turned to face him, her expression defensive. I'm talking about making strategic decisions instead of panic-driven ones. Avery, we have people who need medical attention. The baby is dehydrated. Thompson's cough could be pneumonia. We don't have the luxury of strategy when lives are at risk. And what if rescue doesn't come? What if we broadcast our location and nobody responds and we've used our only signal? Then what? Then we survive anyway, but at least we tried. They stared at each other, the first real conflict between them surfacing with the intensity of people who'd been suppressing disagreement in favor of unity. You think I'm being controlling? Avery said flatly. I think you're reverting to what feels safe. Control, strategy, planning. But this isn't a business negotiation, Avery. This is survival. And sometimes survival means accepting you can't control the outcome. I hate that, Avery said, her voice tight with frustration. I hate being powerless. I know, but powerlessness doesn't mean hopelessness. We can activate the beacon and still explore the island, establish camp, prepare for long-term survival if rescue is delayed. They're not mutually exclusive. Avery looked back at the ocean, her jaw tight with the particular tension of someone struggling between instinct and logic. You're right, she finally said. I don't like it, but you're right. We activate the beacon. Martinez set up the emergency beacon on the beach's highest point, a small device that would broadcast their location to any rescue coordination systems in range. Whether anyone would receive it, whether anyone would respond, remained unknown. But at least they'd tried. Now we explore, Martinez said. Small group, basic reconnaissance. Figure out what resources we have, whether there's higher ground for signaling, any signs of previous human presence. Daniel, Avery, you're with me. Everyone else, continue establishing camp, gathering food and water, caring for those who need it. The three of them headed inland, following the freshwater stream up through increasingly dense vegetation. The island's interior was jungle, thick undergrowth, massive trees, the kind of biodiversity that suggested they were somewhere in the tropical Pacific, but offered no more specific location. This place could sustain us for months if necessary, Martinez observed, examining various plants, coconuts, probably fish in the reef, fresh water. We're not going to starve. But we also have no idea where we are, Avery said. This could be a charted island with regular boat traffic, or it could be completely isolated. We need higher ground, a vantage point to assess our situation. They climbed for an hour, following the stream to its source, a small spring emerging from volcanic rock. Beyond it, the island's central hill rose another 100 feet, steep but climbable. Daniel led the ascent, finding handholds in the rock, helping Avery and Martinez navigate the more difficult sections. His body protested every movement, muscles still recovering from days of rowing and minimal food, but purpose drove him forward, and finally they reached the summit. The view was simultaneously breathtaking and devastating. Ocean in every direction, endless blue stretching to horizons unmarked by any sign of shipping lanes, other islands, or civilization. Their island was small, maybe 2 miles at its longest point, less than a mile wide, isolated completely. Well, Martinez said quietly, that answers the question about regular boat traffic. Avery stood at the edge, staring at the emptiness, and Daniel saw her shoulders tighten with the weight of understanding. They were alone. Completely, absolutely alone. The beacon, she said. It might not reach anything. We could be broadcasting to empty ocean. Or we could be broadcasting to a search grid we just can't see, Daniel countered. We don't know, Avery. That's the point. We don't know. She turned to face him, and Daniel saw something crack in her carefully maintained composure. Tears gathered in her eyes, though she fought them with visible effort. I can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could, but I can't. I can't just wait and hope and have no control over whether we live or die. Daniel moved to her without thinking, pulling her into an embrace that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with human comfort. She resisted for maybe half a second, then collapsed against him, crying with the intensity of someone who'd been holding everything together through sheer will and had finally reached her limit. Martinez tactfully moved away, giving them privacy while pretending to examine the island's geography. It's okay, Daniel said quietly, holding Avery while she shook against him. It's okay to break. You don't have to be strong every second. Yes, I do, Avery said against his shoulder. If I'm not strong, everything falls apart. That's not true. Strength isn't refusing to feel. It's feeling everything and choosing to keep going anyway. You're allowed to be scared, Avery. You're allowed to be human. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with red eyes and complete vulnerability. I don't know how to do this. How to need people. How to trust that someone else can carry the weight when I can't. You're doing it right now, Daniel said gently. That's how you learn. By doing it badly until you do it better. Avery laughed through tears, a wet, broken sound that somehow conveyed both despair and hope. You said that before. It's still true. She kissed him again, and this time it wasn't brief or uncertain. It was desperate and honest, and full of everything they'd been avoiding, attraction, need, the terrifying vulnerability of admitting they needed each other beyond professional cooperation or survival partnership. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Avery's expression had shifted from despair to something more complex, fear mixed with determination, vulnerability mixed with strength. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we survive this together. We trust the beacon, we establish camp, we wait for rescue. And if rescue doesn't come, we build a life here until it does. No panic, no control, just adaptation. Just adaptation, Daniel agreed. Martinez rejoined them, pretending he'd noticed nothing. We should head back. Getting dark soon and navigating jungle in darkness is asking for broken bones. The descent was slower than the climb, all of them exhausted and processing what they'd seen. The island's isolation was both terrifying and strangely peaceful. No immediate threats, but also no immediate salvation. Back at camp, they found that the others had made significant progress. A proper shelter had been constructed. Food had been gathered. The baby was sleeping peacefully after finally getting adequate hydration. Thompson's cough sounded better after rest and fresh water. People had adapted to their new reality with remarkable speed, transforming from passive survivors waiting for rescue into active participants in their own survival. We need to talk about long-term planning, Martinez said, gathering everyone together as evening fell. We've activated the emergency beacon, but we can't count on immediate rescue. This island can sustain us, but we need organization, shelter, food gathering, water management, medical care, watch schedules. We need to function as a community, not just a collection of individuals hoping someone else solves our problems. The nurse stepped forward. I can manage medical care. My supplies are limited, but I can at least monitor Thompson and the baby, treat minor injuries. I can help with food gathering, the accountant offered. Fishing, maybe. I used to fish with my dad. Others volunteered for various tasks: shelter improvement, fire maintenance, water collection. The community was forming organically, people finding roles based on capability rather than prior status. Daniel noticed Avery watching it all with fascination, her analytical mind clearly processing the social dynamics. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "I'm thinking that everything I learned about leadership was wrong," she said. "I thought it was about commanding, controlling, imposing vision, but this," she gestured at the group organizing themselves, "this is actual leadership, emergent, collaborative, based on trust rather than hierarchy." "You could learn from this," Daniel said. "Apply it when we get back." "If we get back." "When we get back," Daniel corrected firmly. "We survive, we get rescued, we go home. That's the only acceptable outcome." Avery smiled slightly. "Your optimism is either inspiring or delusional. I haven't decided which." "Both, probably." That night, after tasks were completed and people settled into sleep, Daniel and Avery sat together at the fire Martinez had built. The flames cast dancing shadows, and the sound of waves provided rhythmic background to quiet conversation. "Tell me something true," Avery said suddenly. "Something you've never told anyone." Daniel considered the request, understanding she was asking for vulnerability to match what she'd shown him on the hilltop. "I'm terrified I'm failing Emma," he said quietly. "Every day I worry that working so much means she's growing up with less of me than she deserves. That she'll remember me as the dad who was always tired, always stressed, always just surviving instead of actually living. I'm scared that one day she'll realize she deserved better than what I could give her." Avery was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful in the firelight. "From everything you've told me about her, Emma sounds happy and loved and secure. Those things don't come from having a perfect parent. They come from having a present one. And you're present, Daniel. Even when you're exhausted, even when you're struggling, you're there for her. That's what she'll remember." "How do you know?" "Because I remember the opposite. My parents gave me everything except themselves: money, education, opportunity, all the external markers of good parenting. But I'd trade every advantage I had for one memory of them actually seeing me as a person instead of an investment. You see, Emma, that's what matters." Daniel reached for her hand, linking their fingers together. "Thank you." "For what?" "For understanding, for not judging, for—" He struggled to articulate the complexity of what he felt. "For being honest about your own pain while acknowledging mine. That's rare." "You make it safe to be honest," Avery said simply. "I've never had that before." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to the ocean and existing in a moment that was both terrible and precious. Stranded, uncertain, but together in a way that felt significant beyond circumstance. "Avery?" Daniel said eventually. "Yeah?" "When we get rescued, I want this to be real. Not just survival partnership or trauma bonding, real connection, real relationship, whatever that looks like in normal life. Can we try for that?" Avery turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "I want that too. But you need to understand something about me, Daniel. I'm not easy to be with. I'm demanding, I'm controlling, I struggle with vulnerability. Being with me will be complicated." "Being with me isn't simple either," Daniel countered. "I have a 6-year-old daughter who's my first priority, always. I work too much because I have to. I'm still processing grief that probably deserves therapy I can't afford." "Complicated doesn't scare me, Avery. Distance does. Dishonesty does. Pretending this doesn't matter would scare me. But complicated? We can work with complicated." Avery smiled, and Daniel saw hope in her expression, fragile but genuine. "Then let's try," she said. "When we get rescued, We try for real. When we get rescued, Daniel agreed. They sealed it with a kiss that was softer than the previous ones, less desperate and more deliberate, a promise rather than a plea. Around them, the island settled into night rhythms. Waves, wind, the crackling fire, people breathing in various states of sleep, and two people who'd found each other in the absolute worst circumstances, discovering that sometimes the worst circumstances revealed the best possibilities. The days that followed established a rhythm. Morning brought tasks, gathering food, improving shelter, maintaining the fire, checking the beacon's status. Afternoons meant rest during peak heat, conservation of energy and shade. Evenings brought communal meals, shared stories, the gradual transformation of strangers into community. Daniel and Avery worked together constantly, their partnership deepening through shared labor and quiet moments between tasks. They mapped the island's resources, established fishing routines, built a signal fire on the hilltop that could be lit if aircraft appeared. And slowly, reluctantly, both of them began to wonder if rescue would ever come. If this island would transition from temporary refuge to permanent home. If the lives they'd left behind were truly recoverable, or if survival meant accepting a fundamentally different future. "We've been here a week," Avery said one evening, standing at the water's edge and watching the sunset. "The beacon's been broadcasting for 6 days. If anyone was close enough to receive it, they'd have responded by now." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe rescue takes longer than we think. Search areas are massive. We could be in their grid, but just haven't been reached yet. Or we could be nowhere near their grid. This island could be completely uncharted. We could be here for months, Daniel, years even. We need to accept that possibility." "I can't accept that. Emma's waiting for me. I promised her I'd come home." Avery turned to face him, her expression gentle but realistic. "And if you can't keep that promise, what then?" Daniel felt something crack inside him, the careful optimism he'd been maintaining, the belief that determination alone could ensure favorable outcomes. The reality of their situation hit him with delayed force, and suddenly the island felt less like temporary refuge and more like permanent prison. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "I honestly don't know how to accept that I might never see her again." Avery moved closer, taking his hands in hers. "Then we don't accept it. Not yet. We keep hoping, keep watching, keep believing rescue is possible. But we also build something sustainable here, so if rescue is delayed, we're not just surviving, we're living. Can you do that? Hope and prepare simultaneously?" Daniel looked at her, this woman who'd been a stranger 2 weeks ago, who'd become essential to his survival in ways that transcended physical safety. Who'd shown him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that connection could exist even in impossible circumstances. "With you," he said. "I can do that with you." Avery smiled, and in that smile Daniel saw everything they'd found together. Trust earned, attraction acknowledged, the beginning of something that felt like it might be love if they gave it space to grow. "Then that's what we do," she said. Together. They stood at the water's edge as darkness fell, two people holding on to each other in hope and the fragile belief that survival could mean more than just staying alive. It could mean finding reasons to want to. The second week on the island brought a shift in how people carried themselves. The initial shock had faded into acceptance, and acceptance had evolved into something resembling routine. Daniel woke each morning to the sound of waves and bird song, found Avery already awake beside him more often than not, and together they joined the camp's daily rhythms with the practiced efficiency of people who'd stopped questioning whether rescue would come and started focusing on how to live until it did. Martinez had organized work teams with surprising effectiveness. The accountant, whose name turned out to be James, had become their primary fisherman, spending hours on the reef with improvised spears and nets woven from salvaged rope. The nurse, Patricia, ran what she called a clinic under the largest palm shelter, monitoring Thompson's recovering lungs and the baby's hydration with limited supplies and impressive resourcefulness. Even the pajama-wearing man had found purpose, constructing elaborate improvements to their shelters with the focused intensity of someone channeling anxiety into creation. Daniel found himself in a leadership role he hadn't sought but couldn't avoid. People asked him questions, sought his input on decisions, looked to him for reassurance when fear threatened to overwhelm practical action. It was strange and uncomfortable and oddly natural all at once, like stepping into a position he'd been prepared for without knowing it. You're good at this, Avery observed one morning as they walked the beach, ostensibly checking for debris, but really just stealing privacy in a community where privacy was nearly impossible. Leading without making it obvious you're leading. I'm not leading, I'm just helping people solve problems. That's literally what leadership is, Avery said with a slight smile. The difference between you and most executives is you don't need the title to function. You just see what needs doing and do it. Daniel picked up a piece of driftwood, examining it for potential usefulness. Everything on the island had become a resource assessment. Nothing was just debris anymore. I learned that from single parenting, he said. There's no one to delegate to when your kid is sick at 3 a.m. You just handle it. Same principle applies here. Except here you have 24 other people depending on your ability to handle it. Avery stopped walking, turning to face him with an expression that was part admiration, part concern. That's a lot of weight, Daniel. Are you actually okay? Or are you just pretending to be okay because everyone needs you to be? The question was so precise, so exactly what Daniel had been avoiding examining, that he felt something shift in his chest. Avery had learned to read him with unsettling accuracy over the past 2 weeks, seeing through the competent facade to the exhausted human beneath. Honestly? Daniel set down the driftwood, meeting her gaze. I'm terrified. Every single day. I wake up thinking about Emma, wondering if she thinks I abandoned her, if Margaret is telling her I'm coming back, or if she's already preparing her for the possibility that I'm not. I'm scared that even if we get rescued, the damage is already done, that I've already failed her in ways I can't fix. Avery moved closer, her hand finding his with the casual intimacy that had developed between them. Emma knows you love her. Children understand love even when they don't understand circumstances. And Margaret sounds like someone who would protect Emma from unnecessary fear while being honest about uncertainty. You're not failing her, Daniel. You're surviving so you can get back to her. What if surviving isn't enough? What if by the time we're rescued, she's... Daniel stopped, unable to articulate the fear that his daughter might move on, might adapt to his absence in ways that made his return disruptive rather than joyful. Then you rebuild, Avery said simply. The same way you rebuilt after Rachel died. The same way you're rebuilding now on this island. You don't give up because things are hard. That's not who you are. Daniel pulled her into an embrace, holding her with the desperate gratitude of someone who'd found unexpected strength in another person. Avery returned the embrace without hesitation, her arms tight around him, both of them taking comfort in physical connection that had become essential to their emotional survival. I love you, Daniel said quietly, the words emerging before he could calculate whether it was too soon, too complicated, too anything. I know that's probably crazy given the circumstances, but it's true. I love you. Avery pulled back just enough to see his face, her expression cycling through surprise, fear, and something that looked like cautious joy. That is crazy, she said. We've known each other 2 weeks. We've spent that time in crisis. This could be trauma bonding or survival instinct or a dozen psychological phenomena that aren't actually love. Could be, Daniel agreed. Is it? Avery was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind clearly working through the question with the same rigor she applied to everything important. No, she finally said. I don't think it is. I think it's real, and that terrifies me more than anything else about this situation. Because loving you means vulnerability I don't know how to manage. It means needing you in ways I've never needed anyone. It means accepting that my happiness is partially dependent on someone else, and I don't know how to do that without losing myself. You don't lose yourself, Daniel said gently. You just expand yourself to include another person. There's a difference. How do you know? Because Rachel taught me. Before her, I thought love meant sacrifice and compromise, and making yourself smaller to fit someone else's needs. She showed me it could be addition instead of subtraction, that 2 people could make each other bigger rather than smaller. I want that with you, Avery. If you're willing to try. Avery's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her usual composure fractured by emotion she couldn't quite control. I'm willing, she said. Terrified, but willing. They kissed with the intensity of people who'd admitted something fundamental and irreversible, both of them aware that whatever happened next, rescue or continued isolation, They'd bound themselves together in ways that would require navigation once they returned to normal life. If they returned to normal life. The kiss was interrupted by shouting from the camp. Daniel and Avery broke apart, immediately alert to potential danger. They ran back toward the shelters, where people were gathered around Martinez, who was holding something small and metallic. "The beacon," Martinez said, his expression grim. "It's dead." Battery finally gave out. A ripple of fear moved through the group. The beacon had been their lifeline, their constant broadcast of hope that someone might hear, might respond, might find them. Without it, they were just people on an island, invisible to anyone who might be searching. "How long has it been broadcasting?" Patricia asked, her voice tight. 12 days. Maybe 13. Should have lasted longer, but the water damage from the storm probably compromised it. Martinez set the dead beacon down carefully. "I'm sorry. I should have checked it more frequently. Maybe conserved battery somehow." "You did everything you could," Daniel said firmly, recognizing the beginning of guilt spiral that served no purpose. "The question now is what we do next. Do we have any other signaling options?" "The signal fire on the hilltop," James offered. "If we maintain it constantly, any aircraft would see the smoke." "That requires constant fuel gathering," Martinez pointed out, "and constant watch to keep it burning. We're talking about significant resource commitment with no guarantee of results." "As opposed to what?" the pajama man asked, his voice sharp with fear. "Sitting here hoping someone stumbles across us by accident?" The group began fracturing into argument, some advocating for the signal fire, others suggesting they conserve energy and resources, a few openly expressing despair that rescue would ever come. Daniel felt the community cohesion that had developed over 2 weeks threatening to dissolve under the weight of renewed uncertainty. "Everyone stop," Avery said, her voice cutting through the chaos with the authority she'd spent 2 weeks trying to soften. "Panic serves no one. We need to make a rational decision based on available information and realistic assessment of our situation. Martinez, how much effort would maintaining a constant signal fire actually require?" Martinez considered the question carefully. 2 people on watch rotation, maybe 3. Constant fuel gathering, probably another 2 people full-time. That's 4 or 5 people committed to signaling instead of food, water, shelter maintenance. We can do it, but it costs us. "And the alternative is accepting that rescue may not come at all," Avery said, "that we may be here indefinitely, which means we need to think long-term, not just survival, but sustainable living, gardens, improved shelter, better food storage. We need to transition from temporary camp to permanent settlement." "You're talking about giving up," Patricia said accusingly. "I'm talking about being realistic," Avery countered. "Hope doesn't require abandoning practical planning. We can maintain the signal fire and develop sustainable infrastructure. They're not mutually exclusive." "She's right," Daniel added. "We've been operating on the assumption that rescue is imminent, which has kept us from making longer-term investments. But we're 2 weeks in with no contact. At some point, hope has to be accompanied by preparation." The argument continued through the afternoon, people weighing desperation against pragmatism, immediate action against sustainable planning. Eventually, a compromise emerged. They would maintain the signal fire during daylight hours when aircraft were most likely, but not at night when the resource cost was higher and the visibility benefit was minimal. They would also begin developing gardens, improving shelters, establishing infrastructure that assumed longer habitation. It was acceptance disguised as strategy, and everyone knew it. But acceptance was survival, and survival was the only option available. That evening, Daniel volunteered for the first signal fire watch shift. Avery joined him without asking, and together they climbed to the island's summit, carrying fuel and the materials needed to maintain the fire through the afternoon into evening. The view was the same as it had been a week earlier. Endless ocean, unmarked horizon, the profound isolation of their situation visible in every direction. Daniel built the fire with practiced efficiency, techniques learned from camping trips with Emma that felt like memories from another lifetime. "Do you think anyone's actually looking for us?" Avery asked quietly, watching the smoke rise into the clear sky. "I think the Coast Guard conducted a search," Daniel said. "Whether they're still searching after 2 weeks, I don't know. Search areas are massive. We could be outside their grid, or they could have concluded there were no survivors." "That's a grim thought." "It's a realistic thought. Grim is just how reality feels sometimes. Avery was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. If we're not rescued, if we're here permanently, what does that mean for us? What do you want it to mean? I want... Avery stopped, struggling with articulation. I want to build something real with you. Not just survival partnership, but actual partnership. Life together, whatever that looks like on an island or back in civilization. But I also know that's complicated. You have Emma, I have a career. We have completely incompatible lives in the real world. Maybe incompatible is the wrong word, Daniel suggested. Maybe just uncombined. We haven't tried to combine them yet. We don't know what's actually possible until we try. And if trying means one of us has to sacrifice things that matter, what then? Then we figure it out together, the same way we figured out everything else on this island, with honesty and compromise and the willingness to prioritize what actually matters over what we thought mattered. Avery turned to look at him directly, her expression vulnerable in the firelight. What actually matters to you, Daniel? If you had to choose between me and Emma... I don't have to choose, Daniel interrupted. That's a false binary. Emma will always be my first priority, always. But that doesn't mean there's no room for you. It means you have to accept that you're not first, and that you're sharing my attention and time and emotional energy with a 6-year-old who needs me completely. Can you live with that? I don't know, Avery admitted. I've never shared anyone before. I've never had to consider someone else's needs equal to or above my own. It's foreign territory. Then we explore the territory together. We make mistakes, we learn, we adjust. That's what relationships are, Avery. Continuous navigation of foreign territory with someone you trust enough to get lost with. She smiled slightly, the expression carrying both fear and hope. You make it sound simple. I make it sound possible. Simple is different than possible. They tended the fire through sunset, watching the sky transform from blue to orange to deep purple to black. Stars emerged with the same shocking clarity they'd shown every night, and Daniel found himself thinking about Emma, wondering if she was looking at the same stars, if Margaret was telling her that her daddy was somewhere under that same sky and fighting to get home. Tell me about Rachel, Avery said suddenly. Really tell me, not just the facts, but who she was, what she meant to you. Daniel felt the familiar ache of grief, softened by time but never truly absent. Talking about Rachel with Avery felt strange and important all at once, introducing his past to his potential future, letting them coexist instead of competing. She was light, he said simply. That's the best way to describe her. Rachel was light in a world that felt dark. She believed in goodness despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. She saw potential in everyone, including me, especially me. I was working construction when we met, barely making rent, no real prospects. She saw past all of that to who I could be and loved me into becoming that person. She sounds extraordinary. She was. She was also frustrating because her optimism sometimes meant ignoring practical realities. She'd donate money we didn't have to causes she believed in. She'd invite homeless people to dinner when we barely had enough food for ourselves. She operated from a place of abundance mentality even when we were living in scarcity. That must have been hard, Avery said. It was. And it was also beautiful, because she taught me that scarcity is sometimes a choice. That generosity creates abundance instead of depleting it. I didn't understand that until she was gone, and I saw how her generosity had created a network of people who showed up for Emma and me when we needed it most. You miss her. Every day. But the missing has changed. It used to be this acute pain that made breathing difficult. Now it's more like Daniel searched for the right metaphor. Like background music. Always present, but not overwhelming the foreground. I can love her memory and still have room for new love. They don't cancel each other out. Avery reached for his hand, linking their fingers together. Thank you for telling me. For trusting me with that. Thank you for asking, for wanting to know. They sat together in comfortable silence, tending the fire and watching the stars and existing in a moment that felt suspended between past and future, grief and hope, loss and possibility. Around midnight, Martinez arrived to relieve them, bringing news that shifted everything. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Thompson collapsed an hour ago. Patricia thinks it's pneumonia that's progressed beyond what she can treat with our supplies. He needs antibiotics, proper medical care. He needs rescue, Daniel, soon. The Coast Guard cutter was organized chaos. Medical personnel conducting rapid assessments, survivors wrapped in thermal blankets despite the tropical heat, Coast Guard officers taking preliminary statements. Daniel sat on a bench near the stern, answering questions mechanically while his mind raced ahead to the reality waiting on shore. Emma, Margaret, his apartment, his job. The entire life he'd left behind that now felt impossibly distant. Avery was 3 benches away, speaking with a different officer, her posture rigid with the particular tension of someone trying to maintain composure under scrutiny. Their eyes met briefly across the deck, and Daniel saw his own uncertainty reflected back, relief at rescue complicated by terror about what came next. The officer interviewing Daniel was young, maybe mid-20s, with the earnest efficiency of someone following protocol exactly. And you were assigned to accompany Miss Monroe to the summit as operational support? Yes. Can you describe the evacuation procedure when the ship began taking on water? Daniel walked through the timeline again. The storm, the ship's distress, the lifeboat launch, the chaos of separation. He kept his answers factual, clinical, avoiding the emotional weight of watching Avery nearly go overboard, or the 4 days adrift, or the 2 weeks on the island. Those details felt private, protected, not for official record. And your relationship with Ms. Monroe, the officer said, consulting his notes. Several survivors mentioned you two were close. Can you clarify the nature of that relationship? Daniel felt his defenses rise immediately. We supported each other through a survival situation. What exactly are you asking? Just gathering information, sir. Some survivors indicated romantic involvement. I need to note it for the record. Note whatever you want, Daniel said, his voice flat. Ms. Monroe and I developed a close working relationship under extreme circumstances. Beyond that is personal. The officer made a notation, and Daniel resisted the urge to grab the tablet and see what was being written. Everything felt invasive suddenly, questions that seemed routine but carried implications about credibility, about appropriateness, about whether what he and Avery had found together would be dismissed as trauma response rather than genuine connection. The interview concluded, and Daniel was directed to medical evaluation. A doctor who looked barely old enough to have finished residency examined him with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, hydration levels, treating the blisters on his hands, and the sunburn across his shoulders. You're in remarkable condition considering the circumstances, the doctor said. Some dehydration, minor injuries, but nothing requiring immediate intervention. We'll keep you overnight for observation, run full labs, but I expect you'll be cleared for release tomorrow. Can I make a phone call? Daniel asked. I need to contact my daughter. She doesn't know... His voice cracked unexpectedly. She doesn't know I'm alive. The doctor's expression softened immediately. Of course. There's a satellite phone available for survivors. I'll have someone bring it to you. 10 minutes later, Daniel held the phone with shaking hands, dialing Margaret's number from memory. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice cautious in the way people sound when receiving calls from unknown numbers. Hello? Margaret, it's Daniel. The sound that emerged from the phone was part sob, part laugh, holy relief. Daniel? Oh my God, Daniel, are you... They said there were survivors, but they wouldn't confirm names, and I've been... Oh my God, you're alive. I'm alive. I'm on a Coast Guard cutter. We're heading to port. I'm okay. Is Emma? She's at school. Daniel, she's been so brave, but she asks about you every single day, and I didn't know what to tell her. I didn't want to... Margaret's voice broke. I'm so glad you're alive. Can you pick her up early? I need to talk to her. I need her to know I'm coming home. Of course. Of course. I'll get her right now. Are you sure you're okay? You're not injured? I'm fine. Exhausted, but fine. Margaret, thank you for taking care of her. I can't... Daniel couldn't find words adequate to express what Margaret's care had meant, the security it had provided, knowing Emma was safe and loved. Thank you. Your family, Margaret said simply. That's what family does. Hold on, I'm getting in the car now. Give me 20 minutes. The call disconnected, and Daniel sat holding the phone, trying to prepare for a conversation with his 6-year-old daughter who'd spent 2 weeks thinking her father might be dead. How did you explain survival to a child? How did you convey that sometimes life was terrifying and uncertain, but you kept fighting anyway? Avery found him during the wait, settling onto the bench beside him without asking permission. She looked exhausted, her usual composure frayed at the edges. "How was your interview?" she asked. "Invasive. Yours?" "Similar. Apparently our relationship is newsworthy." She said the word with slight distaste. The officer kept asking whether my judgment was compromised by personal involvement with subordinate personnel, as if that's relevant to anything about the rescue. "Is it?" Daniel asked. "Relevant, I mean." Avery turned to look at him directly. "Are you asking if I compromised professional standards by getting involved with you?" "I'm asking if you think what happened between us was appropriate given the power dynamic that existed before the ship sank." "Nothing about what happened was appropriate," Avery said. "We were stranded at sea. We fought to survive. We found connection in impossible circumstances. Appropriate doesn't apply to any of that. But do I regret it? No. Do I think it was wrong? No. Do I think we need to be prepared for people to judge it anyway? Absolutely." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding that she was right. They were about to face scrutiny, from Sterling and Wade, from media if the story went public, from everyone who would see their relationship through the lens of boss and subordinate rather than two people who'd kept each other alive. "I'm calling Emma in a few minutes," he said. "She doesn't know I survived. Margaret's picking her up from school now." Avery's expression softened immediately. "Do you want privacy?" "No, I want—" Daniel hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. "I want you to hear this. Because Emma's part of my life permanently, and if we're trying to build something real, you need to understand what that looks like." "Okay," Avery said quietly. "Then I'll stay." The phone rang exactly 23 minutes after the first call. Daniel answered on the first ring. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small and uncertain, nothing like her usual confident enthusiasm. "Hey, sweetheart," Daniel said, his voice breaking on the words. "It's me. I'm okay. They said your boat sank. They said people died." Emma's voice was getting higher, tighter. "I thought you were gone." "I know, baby, I know, but I'm okay. I was on an island for a little while, and now the Coast Guard found us, and I'm coming home. I promise I'm coming home." "When?" "Tomorrow. Maybe the day after. As soon as the doctors say it's okay. But I'm coming home, Emma. I'm so sorry you were scared." "I wasn't scared," Emma said with the particular defiance of children trying to be brave. "Margaret said you were strong and smart, and you'd survive because that's what you do. So I wasn't scared." Daniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed by his daughter's faith and Margaret's wisdom in maintaining it. "Margaret was right, and you were so brave. I'm really proud of you." "Did you get hurt?" "Just a little. Some cuts and sunburn. Nothing serious." "Will you tell me about the island? Was it like in stories?" "I'll tell you everything, but right now I just wanted you to know I'm safe and I love you, and I'll be home soon. Can you be patient a little longer?" "Okay." Emma's voice was still small, but steadier now. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart. So much. I'll see you soon." The call ended and Daniel sat holding the phone, trying to process the conversation while managing the emotional overflow of hearing his daughter's voice after 2 weeks of uncertainty about whether he'd ever hear it again. Avery's hand found his, squeezing gently. "She sounds wonderful." "She is." Daniel wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide the tears. "She's everything good about the world concentrated into one small person, and I get to be her father." "You get to be her father," Avery repeated softly. "That's extraordinary, Daniel. The way you talk about her, the way you love her, it's extraordinary." They sat together on the deck as the cutter powered toward port, both of them aware that landfall meant facing realities they'd been able to ignore on the island. Daniel would return to single parenthood and an entry-level job that barely covered expenses. Avery would return to executive responsibilities and corporate politics. The question was whether what they'd found together could survive the collision with normal life. The cutter docked at San Diego just before sunset. Media was waiting. News vans, cameras, reporters shouting questions about the sinking and the survivors and the dramatic rescue. Coast Guard personnel formed a barrier, ushering survivors through the chaos toward waiting transport. Daniel caught glimpses of headlines on phones held by reporters. Miracle rescue after 2 weeks stranded. 25 survivors found on remote island. Questions raised about ship safety standards. His name wasn't visible, but Avery's was. She was newsworthy in ways he wasn't, her status as youngest executive making the survival story more compelling to media narratives. They were separated at the dock, different transport vehicles, different hospitals for overnight observation. Daniel wanted to protest, wanted to stay with Avery, but the logistics of mass casualty management didn't accommodate personal preferences. "I'll call you," Avery said quickly before they were directed to separate vehicles. "As soon as they let me have my phone, I'll call you." "I'll be waiting," Daniel said. They were torn apart by the machinery of rescue operations, and Daniel felt the loss more acutely than he'd expected. 2 weeks of constant proximity had made separation feel wrong, incomplete. He understood intellectually that they needed medical evaluation, that they'd see each other again soon, but emotionally he just wanted to hold on to the person who'd kept him sane through impossible circumstances. The hospital was efficient and impersonal. More medical tests, more questions, a private room that felt simultaneously luxurious and isolating after 2 weeks of communal living. Daniel showered for the first time in 14 days, watching dirt and salt and island debris wash away down the drain. The mirror showed someone thinner than he remembered, burned by sun, aged by experience, but alive. Fundamentally, impossibly alive. His phone had been recovered from the ship's manifest and returned to him, though the battery was dead and the device likely unsalvageable from water damage. The hospital provided a replacement temporarily, and Daniel used it to text Margaret that he was safe, in hospital, would call in the morning. Sleep should have come easily after 2 weeks of minimal rest on uncomfortable surfaces. Instead, Daniel lay awake in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling and processing everything that had happened. The storm, the lifeboat, the island, Avery, the rescue. It felt like multiple lifetimes compressed into 14 days, and his mind couldn't quite organize the experiences into coherent narrative. His temporary phone rang at 11 p.m. "Avery." "Hey," he said, answering immediately. "Hey." Her voice was tired but steady. "They finally gave me my phone back. Well, a replacement phone. The original is somewhere at the bottom of the Pacific. How are you?" "Physically fine. Emotionally confused. You?" "Same. This feels surreal, Daniel. Being in a hospital bed with clean sheets and unlimited water and total privacy. I keep expecting to wake up on the island and discover rescue was a dream." "I know. Part of me misses it. Is that crazy?" "No," Avery said. "I miss it too. Not the danger or the uncertainty, but the simplicity, I guess. Everything mattered or it didn't. Hierarchy was irrelevant. Connection was honest because survival required it. And now we're back in the real world where none of that applies." "Does it have to not apply?" Avery asked. "Can't we choose to bring that honesty back with us?" "I want to," Daniel said. "But I also know the real world has complications the island didn't. You have a career that demands everything. I have a daughter who needs everything. We have completely different lives and completely different economic realities. How do we navigate that without one of us sacrificing things that matter?" Avery was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the question with her characteristic analytical rigor. "I don't know," she finally admitted, "but I know I want to try. I know that what we found on that island matters more than career advancement or maintaining comfortable distance. I know I love you, Daniel, even though that terrifies me. And I know that love means being willing to change, to compromise, to build something new instead of trying to force what we have into existing structures that don't fit." Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion that was equal parts hope and fear. "I love you too. And I want to build something new. But Avery, you need to understand, Emma comes first, always. That's non-negotiable. If loving me means accepting that you're never my first priority, Can you actually live with that? I don't know, Avery said honestly. I've never had to share anyone before. I've never loved anyone the way I love you. I'm going to make mistakes, probably a lot of them. I'm going to struggle with jealousy and insecurity and all the messy emotions I've spent my adult life avoiding, but I want to try, Daniel. I want to learn how to love you and Emma both, even if I'm terrible at it initially. You won't be terrible at it. You don't know that. I know you, Daniel said. I know that when you commit to something, you commit completely. I know that you're capable of extraordinary growth when you choose to be vulnerable. I know that Emma will probably love you because children see through pretense to authentic care. And you care, Avery, even when you're scared of caring. How do you know I care about Emma? I haven't even met her. Because you asked about her. Because you listen when I talk about her. Because you understand she's part of who I am and you're choosing me anyway. That's care, even if it's complicated care. Avery laughed softly. You're very good at this. At seeing the best possible interpretation of people's motivations. I learned from Rachel, and I'm choosing to apply it to you because you deserve someone who sees your potential instead of just your defenses. They talked until after midnight, neither wanting to disconnect despite exhaustion. Eventually, Avery's doctor insisted she sleep, and they ended the call with promises to connect in the morning. Daniel finally drifted into sleep thinking about the future, uncertain, complicated, but possible in ways he'd stopped believing in after Rachel's death. Morning brought medical clearance and discharge paperwork. Daniel was released with instructions to follow up with his primary care physician, stay hydrated, monitor for any delayed symptoms of trauma. He dressed in clothes provided by the hospital, basic jeans and a t-shirt that didn't quite fit, but were better than the salt-stained remnants of business casual he'd been wearing when rescued. Margaret was waiting in the lobby with Emma, and the sight of his daughter broke something open in Daniel's chest. She looked older somehow, or maybe he was just seeing her with the perspective of someone who thought he might never see her again. Daddy! Emma ran to him, and Daniel dropped to his knees, catching her in an embrace that felt like coming home in relief and overwhelming gratitude all compressed into a single moment. Hey, sweetheart, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I missed you so much. I knew you'd come back, Emma said against his shoulder. Margaret said you always come back. Daniel looked up at Margaret over Emma's head, mouthing thank you with an intensity that couldn't possibly convey adequate gratitude. Margaret just smiled, her eyes wet with her own tears. They drove back to his apartment in Margaret's car, Emma chattering about school and the 2 weeks she'd spent with Margaret and everything she wanted to tell him. Daniel listened with the full attention he'd been preserving for this moment, letting Emma's voice wash over him like healing. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it, cluttered with the organized chaos of single parenthood, Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, dishes in the sink from a breakfast he'd eaten 3 weeks ago. It should have felt familiar. Instead, it felt foreign, like visiting a life he'd abandoned rather than returning to one he'd been fighting to reach. Can I make you tea? Margaret asked. Or coffee? You look exhausted. Coffee would be great, thank you. Margaret moved into the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd spent 2 weeks managing the space, leaving Daniel and Emma in the living room. Daddy, your hands are all hurt, Emma said, noticing the bandages on his palms. I had to row a boat for a long time. It made blisters. Did it hurt? Yes, but I was rowing to get back to you, so it was worth it. Emma processed this with the serious consideration she gave everything important. Tell me about the island. Was it scary? Sometimes. But there were other people with me, and we helped each other. We built shelters and found food and took care of each other until the Coast Guard found us. Were there any kids? A few. There was a baby and some older children. They were very brave. Were you brave? Daniel thought about the question carefully. I tried to be. Sometimes I was scared, but I kept going anyway. That's what brave means, being scared but doing what you need to do. Emma nodded slowly. Margaret says that too. She says you're the bravest person she knows. Margaret's very kind, but you were brave too, sweetheart. Being patient and trusting that I'd come home took a lot of courage. It was hard, Emma admitted. But I remembered what you always say, that we do hard things because we're strong. Daniel pulled her close again, overwhelmed by how much he'd missed her and how much she'd grown in just 2 weeks. Children change so quickly at this age, and he'd missed 14 days of her life that he could never get back. Margaret returned with coffee, and they sat together in the living room while Emma showed Daniel drawings she'd made, colorful depictions of islands and boats, and a figure she identified as Daddy coming home. She drew one every night, Margaret said quietly. Her way of processing the uncertainty. Daniel looked at the stack of drawings, each one a window into his daughter's emotional state during his absence. Some were bright and optimistic. Others were darker, more chaotic. All of them ended with him coming home. Thank you for taking care of her, he said to Margaret. I don't have words for what it meant knowing she was with you. You don't need words. Your family, Daniel. Rachel would have wanted me to be here for both of you. Margaret stood, gathering her things. I'll give you two some time together, but call me if you need anything. And Daniel, I'm so glad you're home. After Margaret left, Daniel and Emma spent the afternoon together, reading books, playing games, just existing in proximity that felt precious after 2 weeks of absence. Emma fell asleep on the couch around 4 p.m., exhausted by the emotional intensity of reunion, and Daniel covered her with a blanket before stepping onto the apartment's small balcony. His phone rang. Avery. Hey, he answered quietly. How are you? Discharged this morning, currently at a hotel because apparently my apartment is being used by insurance investigators examining personal belongings from the ship. How are you? Home. With Emma. She's asleep on the couch. Daniel looked back through the sliding door at his daughter, peaceful in sleep. It feels surreal being back. I know. Everything feels wrong somehow. Too easy, too comfortable. Like we don't deserve comfort after what everyone else went through. Survivor's guilt, Daniel said. It's normal. We'll process it. Probably need therapy to process it properly, but we'll get there. Daniel, I need to tell you something. Avery's voice shifted, becoming more serious. Sterling and Wade called. They want to meet tomorrow. About the summit, about the sinking, about us. They know we were together on the island, and they're concerned about professional conduct implications. Daniel felt his stomach drop. What kind of implications? The kind where they question whether our relationship compromises future working dynamics, whether I can supervise projects you're involved in, whether there's liability exposure if other employees claim the relationship created preferential treatment or hostile work environment. That's insane. We were stranded together. We didn't choose the circumstances. I know, but corporations don't care about circumstances. They care about liability and optics and maintaining clear ethical boundaries. They're going to ask me to clarify the nature of our relationship and whether it presents ongoing concerns. What are you going to tell them? Avery was quiet for a moment. I don't know. What do you want me to tell them? The truth, Daniel said, that we developed a relationship under extraordinary circumstances, that we're trying to navigate what that means in normal life, that whatever we build together is our business, not theirs, as long as it doesn't affect our professional performance. And if they say it does affect our professional performance, if they say I can't supervise projects you're on, or that you need to transfer departments, or that one of us needs to leave the company? Daniel felt the weight of that question settle over him. He'd fought so hard to survive, to get back to Emma, to build something real with Avery. The idea that corporate politics could dismantle all of it felt impossibly cruel. Then we make choices, he said, based on what actually matters. Emma matters. You matter. A job is just a job, Avery. Even a good job. Even a career you've worked for. It's replaceable in ways people aren't. You're saying you'd quit if they demanded it? I'm saying I'm not letting them dictate my personal life, and neither should you. You're the youngest executive in company history. You survived a shipwreck and 2 weeks stranded at sea. You're not powerless here, Avery. You have leverage. Or I have everything to lose, Avery said quietly. My career is all I've built. If I lose that, what do I have? Me, Daniel said simply. Emma. The possibility of building something that matters more than professional achievement. That's what you have, if you choose to value it. Avery was silent for so long that Daniel thought the call might have dropped. I'm scared, she finally said. I'm terrified of choosing wrong, of sacrificing everything I've worked for and discovering it wasn't worth it. But I'm more terrified of choosing my career and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Then choose us, Daniel said, not because it's safe or certain, but because it's honest. Because what we found on that island is worth fighting for in the real world. Okay, Avery said, and Daniel heard determination in her voice. Okay, I'll tell Sterling and Wade that my personal life is my own business, and if they have concerns about professional conduct, they can assign oversight to someone else. But I'm not ending what we have because they're uncomfortable with complexity. Are you sure? No, but I'm sure I want to try, and sometimes that has to be enough. They talked for another hour, making plans to meet the following evening after Avery's meeting with Sterling and Wade. When the call ended, Daniel felt simultaneously hopeful and terrified about what the next few days would bring. Emma woke up from her nap disoriented, took a moment to remember Daniel was actually home, then smiled with such pure joy that it made his chest ache. "Daddy, can we make dinner together?" she asked. "Like we used to?" "Absolutely. What do you want to make?" "Spaghetti." They made spaghetti together in the tiny kitchen, Emma helping with sauce stirring and garlic bread preparation with the focused seriousness she brought to all tasks. It was domestic and ordinary and achingly precious. After 2 weeks when Daniel had thought he might never experience ordinary again. Over dinner, Emma asked questions about the island, what they ate, where they slept, whether there were animals. Daniel answered honestly but carefully, sharing the adventure without the terror, giving her age-appropriate truth without traumatic details. "Did you make friends?" Emma asked. "I did. There was someone named Avery who was very brave and smart. We helped each other a lot." "Is Avery a grown-up?" "Yes." "Is Avery nice?" Daniel smiled at the transparent questioning. "Avery is very nice, and I think you'd like her." "Will I meet her?" "Would you want to?" Emma considered this with characteristic seriousness. "If Avery is your friend and helped you come home, then yes, I want to meet her." Daniel felt emotion catch in his throat. This was the beginning of integration, introducing Avery to Emma, letting his two worlds collide, trusting that both could coexist without destroying each other. "Then you will," he said. "Soon." The next evening, Daniel brought Emma to Margaret's house with the explanation that he had a meeting for work. It wasn't exactly a lie. He was meeting Avery after her Sterling and Wade debrief, but it felt dishonest somehow to not tell Emma the complete truth. He met Avery at a quiet restaurant far from Sterling and Wade's offices, somewhere neutral and private where they could talk without professional surveillance. She looked different in business attire, more like the executive he'd first met, less like the woman he'd held through storms and survival. But when she saw him, her expression shifted into something softer, more genuine, and Daniel saw the person beneath the professional armor. "How did it go?" he asked after they'd ordered. "About as expected. They expressed concern about professional boundaries. I expressed commitment to maintaining appropriate conduct while asserting that my personal life is my own business. They suggested it might be best if we avoided working on projects together directly. I agreed that was reasonable accommodation." "That's it?" "For now. They're concerned about optics if the relationship becomes public knowledge. Youngest female executive dating subordinate employee plays into narratives they'd rather avoid. But they're not demanding we end the relationship or that either of us resign. Just asking for discretion and professional distance. Can you live with that?" Avery met his gaze directly. "Can you? You're the one who will be navigating workplace dynamics where everyone knows your girlfriend is an executive. That's going to create assumptions, resentment, accusations of preferential treatment, even when none exists." "Girlfriend," Daniel said, testing the word. "Is that what we're calling this?" "I don't know. What would you call it?" "Complicated," Daniel said with a slight smile. "Important, terrifying, worth protecting despite not having appropriate labels." "So we're in a complicated, important, terrifying, label-deficient relationship," Avery said. "That's very on brand for us." "It is." Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand. "Avery, I need to ask you something important. Are you ready to meet Emma?" He saw her expression shift immediately, fear crossing her face despite obvious efforts to hide it. "Already?" she asked. "Not tomorrow, but soon, because Emma's my life. And if we're building something real, you need to be part of that life, not separate from it. What if she doesn't like me? She will. But even if the initial meeting is awkward, we work through it, the same way we've worked through everything else. Avery was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the weight of what he was asking. Okay, she finally said. When you think the timing is right, I'll meet her. I'll probably be terrible at it initially. I have no experience with children, and 6-year-olds are terrifying, but I'll try. That's all I'm asking. Just try. They ate dinner talking about logistics and practicalities, when Avery's apartment would be accessible again, whether Daniel needed to find new employment to avoid workplace complications, how they'd navigate public appearances given media interest in the survival story. It was mundane conversation about extraordinary circumstances, and somehow that made it feel more real than any of the intensity on the island had. After dinner, they walked through the city streets, maintaining careful physical distance in case anyone recognized them. Everything felt constrained by external observation in ways that made Daniel miss the island's isolation. "This is going to be hard," Avery said quietly. "Harder than I expected. The real world has so many more rules than survival did." "Do you regret it, choosing to try this?" "No, but I'm acknowledging the difficulty. That's not the same as regret." They reached Daniel's car and he turned to face her properly. "Come over this weekend," he said. "Saturday afternoon. Meet Emma. No pressure, no expectations. Just meet the most important person in my life and let her meet the person who's becoming equally important." Avery's expression cycled through fear and determination before settling on something resembling acceptance. "Okay," she said. "Saturday. What should I bring?" "Just yourself." Emma's perceptive. She'll see through any performance to authentic care. So just be honest. "Honest," Avery repeated. "That's what you keep asking for. Honesty." "It's what matters," Daniel said simply. They parted with a brief kiss, careful and restrained, nothing like the desperate embraces on the island, but carrying the same fundamental truth, that they'd chosen each other despite complications, that they were committed to navigating difficulty together. Saturday arrived with anxiety Daniel hadn't anticipated. He cleaned the apartment obsessively, prepared lunch with excessive care, talked to Emma about meeting someone important to him without creating unrealistic expectations. "Is this Avery from the island?" Emma asked, immediately connecting the dots. "Yes, she's my friend, and I wanted you two to meet." "Is she your special friend?" Emma asked with the knowing tone of children who understood more than adults gave them credit for. "She might be. Is that okay with you?" Emma considered this seriously. "Will she try to be my new mom?" Daniel's heart broke a little at the question. "No, sweetheart. No one will ever replace your mom. Rachel will always be your mom. But Avery might become someone else important in both our lives, someone who cares about us." "Okay," Emma said. "I'll meet her. But if I don't like her, you'll tell her to leave, right?" "I'll tell her we need more time. But I think you will like her, Emma. I think she's going to try really hard to be someone you can trust." Avery arrived exactly on time, carrying a wrapped gift that she handed to Daniel with visible nervousness. "I didn't know what 6-year-olds like," she said quietly, "so I got books. Books are safe, right? Books are perfect." He led her inside, where Emma was waiting in the living room with the particular stillness of someone evaluating a new situation. "Emma, this is Avery. Avery, this is Emma." "Hi, Emma," Avery said, and Daniel heard the effort behind her attempt at casualness. "Your dad has told me so much about you." "Hi," Emma said, studying Avery with the intense scrutiny only children could manage. "Did you really help my dad on the island?" "I did, and he helped me too. We helped each other." "Were you scared?" "Very scared. But your dad was brave, and that helped me be brave too." Emma processed this, clearly evaluating whether Avery was trustworthy. "I brought you a present," Avery said, offering the wrapped package. "Your dad said you like to read." Emma took the gift carefully, unwrapping it to reveal 3 books, age-appropriate, beautifully illustrated stories about adventure and friendship and courage. "These are really good," Emma said, examining the books with genuine interest. "Thank you. You're welcome." The afternoon progressed with careful navigation of unfamiliar territory. Avery was clearly out of her depth with children, but she tried, asking Emma questions, listening to her answers, showing genuine interest in a 6-year-old's perspective. Emma remained cautious but not hostile, allowing Avery into her space incrementally. During lunch, Emma asked Avery directly, "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" Avery glanced at Daniel, clearly seeking guidance. He nodded slightly. Honesty was the only option. "I might be," Avery said carefully. "Your dad and I care about each other, and we're trying to figure out what that means, but whatever happens, it doesn't change how much your dad loves you. You're the most important person in his life." "I know," Emma said with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted that truth. "But if you're important to him, I want to make sure you're nice." "That's very smart," Avery said. "And I promise I'll always try to be nice. But if I'm ever not nice, you should tell your dad, because he should know." Emma seemed satisfied by this answer, and the tension in the room eased slightly. After lunch, Emma showed Avery her drawings, including the ones she'd made while Daniel was missing. Avery looked at each one seriously, asking questions and making comments that showed she was actually paying attention rather than just performing interest. "This one is my favorite," Emma said, showing a drawing of an island with a figure labeled Daddy and another labeled Avery. "I made it after Dad called and said you helped him. I wanted to remember you were nice to him." Avery's eyes were bright with tears she was clearly fighting to control. "Thank you for making this, Emma. It's really special." When the afternoon concluded and Avery prepared to leave, Emma surprised everyone by hugging her briefly. "You can come back," Emma said, "if you want to." "I'd like that," Avery said, her voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." Daniel walked Avery to her car, both of them aware that the meeting had gone better than either had expected. "She's incredible," Avery said. "Smart and perceptive and so much like you, it's almost eerie." "She liked you," Daniel said. "That hug was her seal of approval. She doesn't hug people she doesn't trust." "I was terrified I'd do something wrong, say something inappropriate, ruin everything before it started." "You didn't. You were honest and respectful, and you treated her like a person rather than an obstacle. That's all she needed." Avery leaned against her car, looking exhausted and relieved. "This is really happening, isn't it? We're actually building something real." "We are," Daniel confirmed. "Complicated, terrifying, label deficient, and real." "I love you," Avery said. "I know I said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. Not just survival bonding or trauma response. Real love that terrifies me and makes me want to be better than I've been." "I love you too," Daniel said. "And we're going to figure this out. Together." They kissed goodbye with the careful restraint of people aware that a 6-year-old might be watching from a window. Then Avery drove away, leaving Daniel standing in the parking lot feeling more hopeful than he'd felt since before the storm. The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Daniel returned to work at Sterling and Wade, navigating the awkward dynamics of everyone knowing about his relationship with Avery while trying to maintain professional boundaries. Avery managed her executive responsibilities while carving out time for Daniel and gradually, incrementally, Emma. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the stress of balancing work and parenthood and relationship felt overwhelming. Moments when Avery's lack of experience with children created friction. Moments when Emma's adjustment to having another important adult in her father's life manifested as behavior challenges. But there were also moments of unexpected grace. Avery reading to Emma before bed, both of them curled up on the couch with books and quiet companionship. Emma asking Avery questions about business and strategy with the same seriousness she asked about everything. Avery learning to braid hair because Emma wanted to match her friend's style and Daniel had no idea how. 3 months after the rescue, Sterling and Wade announced a major restructuring. Several executive positions were being eliminated or reassigned. Avery was offered a choice: relocate to the New York office with a promotion or remain in San Diego with lateral responsibility. She chose San Diego without hesitation. "The promotion doesn't matter," she told Daniel when explaining her decision. "What matters is here. You're here. Emma's here. And I finally understand that career advancement is just one measurement of success and not the most important one." 6 months after the rescue, Thompson, the retired teacher who'd nearly died from pneumonia, organized a reunion for all the survivors. They gathered at a beach house in Coronado, 25 people who'd lived through impossible circumstances together. Daniel and Avery arrived with Emma, who was fascinated to meet the people from her father's island stories. The afternoon was strange and beautiful. People who'd shared trauma finding joy in survival, children playing in the sand, adults sharing updates on how they'd rebuilt their lives. Martinez had gone back to sea. Patricia had started a nonprofit providing emergency medical training. James, the accountant, had quit his job and was now teaching sailing. Everyone had been changed by the experience in ways both visible and hidden. "You two look happy," Martinez observed, seeing Daniel and Avery together with Emma between them. "We are," Daniel said simply. "Good. You deserve it, both of you." As evening fell, everyone gathered on the beach for dinner. Emma sat between Daniel and Avery, comfortable with both, chattering about school and friends and the shells she'd collected. Daniel watched her and thought about how much had changed since the storm, how crisis had revealed who he was at his core, how vulnerability had made space for connection, how choosing love over fear had created possibility. "What are you thinking?" Avery asked quietly. "That I'm grateful," Daniel said, "for surviving, obviously, but also for everything that came after. For finding you, for Emma meeting you, for building something I didn't know was possible." "Me too," Avery said, her hand finding his under the table. "I spent my whole life thinking control and achievement were the paths to fulfillment. Turns out surrender and connection matter more. You taught me that. We taught each other." Emma looked up from her shells, sensing the emotional weight of the conversation. "Are you two being mushy?" "A little bit," Daniel admitted. "That's okay," Emma said generously. "You're allowed to be mushy sometimes." The evening concluded with a bonfire, survivors sharing stories and laughter, and the complicated gratitude of people who'd survived together. Daniel held Emma on one side and Avery on the other, both of them essential to who he was now, both of them proof that survival could mean more than just staying alive. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep in the car on the drive home, Avery said quietly, "I want to propose something." "Okay." "I want to move in together, not immediately, but soon. I want to wake up with you and Emma and build a life that acknowledges we're family now, even if the configuration is non-traditional." Daniel felt his heart rate increase with a combination of joy and terror. "Are you sure? That's a big step. There's no going back once you commit to living with a single dad and his 6-year-old. "I'm sure. I'm terrified, but sure. I love you, Daniel. I love Emma. I want to build something permanent instead of just navigating between separate lives." "Then let's do it," Daniel said. "Let's build something permanent." 6 months later, they moved into a new apartment, bigger than Daniel's studio, with space for Emma's room and a home office for Avery and a life they were creating together. It wasn't perfect. Avery still struggled with the chaos of children, Daniel still worried about financial stability, Emma still had moments of missing her mother that no amount of love from Avery could replace. But it was real. It was honest. It was built on the foundation of two people who'd survived impossible circumstances and chosen to keep choosing each other despite complications. One evening, after Emma was asleep and they sat together on the couch in their new home, Avery said, "Do you ever regret it? The storm, the island, all of it?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "I regret the people who died. I regret the trauma everyone experienced. But do I regret what we found? No, I wouldn't choose the circumstances, but I'm grateful for the outcome." "Me too," Avery said. "And I think I'm finally happy, Daniel. Actually, genuinely happy. Not achieving, not acquiring, just content. That's new for me. It looks good on you." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who'd been strangers when a storm hit, who'd become partners when survival required it, who'd chosen to become family when normal life resumed. The path had been impossible to predict, the outcome uncertain until they'd committed to it, but here they were, building something real from the wreckage of what had been. Outside, the city continued its rhythms. Ships moved across distant waters, carrying people toward destinations unknown. Storms formed and dissipated across oceans vast and indifferent. And somewhere, on a small island in the Pacific, Palm trees swayed in trade winds, and waves crashed against beaches where 25 people had learned that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant finding reasons to want to live, and having the courage to protect those reasons once you found them. Daniel looked at Avery, at the home they'd built, at the life they were creating one imperfect day at a time, and felt the particular peace that came from knowing he'd survived the worst and found the best. That love, in whatever form it took, was worth every risk. That vulnerability was strength. That connection was salvation. That sometimes the storm that destroyed everything was the same storm that made new life possible. And that was worth surviving for.